In Cedar Falls, Montana, a desperate widow clutching her twin daughter's hands was about to face the most humiliating rejection of her life. What started as hope for a new beginning took a devastating turn when Thomas Brennan took one look at her children and declared their marriage arrangement void. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't your typical mail-order bride. For 3 years, she had spent her life fighting poverty in Chicago's tenements, known for her fierce determination to protect her daughters at any cost. When she encountered public rejection and found herself stranded with no money for return passage, she had no idea salvation would come from an unexpected source. Eleanor's acceptance of Reverend Samuel Cross's practical proposal would lead to a love story that defied convention. What began as a marriage of convenience would become Cedar Falls' greatest testament to chosen family. The frontier community would never be the same after witnessing love bloom from desperation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train's whistle cut through the mountain air like a blade, announcing Eleanor Hartwell's arrival in Cedar Falls with a finality that made her stomach clench. She pressed her face to the grimy window, watching the frontier town emerge from the Montana wilderness, a collection of weathered buildings scattered along a main street that looked smaller than she'd dared to imagine. Beside her, 8-year-old Rose bounced with excitement, while Lily sat silent, her dark eyes taking in everything with the careful observation that had marked her since infancy. "Is that it, Mama?" Rose whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Is that our new home?" Eleanor's hand found her daughter's shoulder, squeezing gently. "We'll see, darling." The words came out steadier than she felt. In her worn carpet bag sat Thomas Brennan's last letter, creased from countless readings, promising a new life for a woman willing to work hard and provide companionship to a successful merchant. He'd never mentioned children in his correspondence, but Eleanor had convinced herself that a man of his standing would understand. Children were a blessing, after all. The train shuddered to a halt, and Eleanor gathered their meager belongings. 3 years of Chicago tenement life had taught her to travel light. Everything they owned fit in the single carpet bag and a small cloth bundle tied with twine. She'd sold everything else, including her wedding ring, to afford their passage west. "Stay close," she murmured to the twins as they stepped onto the platform. The September air carried the bite of approaching winter, and Eleanor pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Several townspeople had gathered to watch the train's arrival, their curious gazes settling on the small family with obvious interest. "That must be Brennan's woman," she heard someone whisper, the words carrying clearly in the crisp air. Eleanor lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of dignity she'd cultivated through years of hardship. She'd been beautiful once, Robert had told her so often enough. But widowhood and poverty had carved sharp lines around her eyes and hollow spaces beneath her cheekbones. Still, she'd pinned her dark hair carefully that morning and pressed her best dress with a heated iron borrowed from her Chicago landlady. "Thomas Brennan?" she asked the station master, a grizzled man with kind eyes. "That'd be the general." "Store, ma'am, right down Main Street." He gestured toward the largest building visible from the platform. "Can't miss it." Eleanor took each daughter by the hand, Rose's palm warm and eager, Lily's cool and slightly trembling. They walked the dusty street while townspeople emerged from doorways and storefronts, word of their arrival spreading like ripples in a pond. By the time they reached Brennan's general store, a small crowd had formed at a respectful distance. The store's bell jangled as Eleanor pushed open the door, and a man emerged from behind the counter. Thomas Brennan was exactly as he'd described. Himself, 42 years old, of medium height, with thinning brown hair and a prosperous paunch that spoke of successful commerce. His eyes lit with cautious approval as they took in Eleanor's appearance, then dropped to the children flanking her. The change in his expression was immediate and devastating. "Mr. Brennan?" Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her heart began a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell. We've been corresponding." Thomas's gaze moved between Rose and Lily, his mouth settling into a hard line. "Mrs. Hartwell." His tone had gone cold as mountain stone. "You didn't mention children in your letters. I have 2 daughters, Rose and Lily. They're good girls, very well behaved." Eleanor felt, rather than saw, the twins press closer to her skirts. "Rose can already help with—" "No." The word cracked like a whip. "Absolutely not. I made no agreement to support children. My advertisement was quite specific. I need a wife, not a ready-made family." Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "Mr. Brennan, if we could discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss." Thomas moved to the store's entrance, clearly intending to usher them out. "I'm sorry you've made the journey, but there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps the next train east. There isn't money for return passage." The admission cost Eleanor dearly. She'd spent her last dollars on their westbound tickets, banking everything on Thomas's promise of marriage and security. "I used everything we had to come here." Thomas's face hardened further. "That's unfortunate, but it's not my concern. I never agreed to this arrangement." The store's bell jangled as curious townspeople began filtering inside, drawn by the raised voices. Eleanor felt their stares like brands against her skin. A well-dressed woman near the door whispered something to her companion, both sets of eyes fixed on Eleanor with a mixture of pity and judgment. "Please," Eleanor said quietly, her pride warring with desperation. "Just give us a chance. The girls won't be any trouble and I can work. I'm an excellent seamstress and I can cook clean." "I said no." Thomas's voice carried clearly to every corner of the store. "Find somewhere else to peddle your charity case. I'm a businessman, not a fool." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She heard Rose's sharp intake of breath, saw Lily's face go pale with understanding beyond her years. Around them, the gathered townspeople shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, while others watched with the fascination reserved for public disasters. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "You corresponded with me for months. You promised—" "I promised to marry a woman, not inherit 2 children I never wanted." Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You deceived me. Whatever promises you think I made are void." The store fell silent, except for the tick of the wall clock and Rose's muffled sob. Eleanor felt something break inside. Her chest, not her heart, which had been broken years ago when Robert died, but something deeper. Her last hope, perhaps. Her final chance at providing her daughters the stability they deserved. She gathered the twins closer, Rose's small hand finding hers while Lily pressed against her side. "Come along, girls," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll find another solution." As they moved toward the door, Eleanor caught fragments of whispered conversations. Poor things. Nowhere to go. What kind of woman travels so far with children? Should have known better. While outside the store, the mountain air felt thin and sharp in Eleanor's lungs. The crowd that had gathered to witness Thomas Brennan's mail-order bride dispersed slowly, leaving the 3 of them standing on the wooden boardwalk like actors. After the curtain had fallen, "Mama!" Rose's voice was small and frightened. "What do we do now?" Eleanor looked down at her daughters, Rose with her father's optimistic spirit, Lily with her own careful reserve, and felt the full weight of her failure settle on her shoulders. They had nowhere to go, no money, and winter was coming to the Montana mountains. "We'll figure something out," she said, because she had to say something. "We always do." But as the sun began its descent behind the peaks surrounding Cedar Falls, Eleanor Hartwell had never felt more alone. The train station loomed ahead of them, the only shelter she could afford, and the uncertain kindness of strangers was all that stood between her daughters and the harsh realities of frontier justice. The mountains watched, indifferent to their troubles, as three small figures made their way back toward the platform where their journey to a new life had ended before it could truly begin. The train station offered little comfort as night settled over Cedar Falls. Eleanor had found a corner of the waiting room where she and the twins could huddle together on a hard wooden bench, their carpetbag serving as a makeshift pillow for the girls. Rose had finally cried herself to sleep against Eleanor's shoulder, while Lily lay curled on her other side, her breathing shallow and watchful, even in rest. Eleanor stared through the grimy window at the town that had rejected them. Lamplight flickered in windows along Main Street, each golden square representing the warmth and security that remained beyond their reach. Her stomach cramped with hunger. They'd eaten the last of their bread that morning on the train, but worse than physical discomfort was the crushing weight of her failure. She'd gambled everything on Thomas Brennan's promises, and now her daughters would pay the price for her desperation. The station master had been kind enough not to ask them to leave, though his pitying glances cut almost as deeply as Thomas's rejection. Tomorrow she would have to swallow what remained of her pride and ask if there was work to be found in Cedar Falls. Anything that might earn them enough for shelter and food while she figured out their next move. Dawn came grey and cold, filtered through mountain clouds that promised early snow. Eleanor had dozed fitfully, jerking awake whenever Rose shifted or Lily whimpered in her sleep. Her neck ached from the awkward position, and her mouth felt dry as cotton. "Mama?" Rose's voice was hoarse with sleep and unshed tears. "Are we going home to Chicago?" "We can't, sweetheart." Eleanor smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "Remember, we don't have a home there anymore." Lily sat up slowly, her dark eyes immediately scanning their surroundings with the wariness of a child who had learned too young that safety was never guaranteed. "What about the mean man's store?" "Mr. Brennan has made his decision." Eleanor kept her voice steady, though. The memory of yesterday's humiliation still burned. "We'll find another way." The station door opened with a creak of hinges, bringing a rush of cold air and the silhouette of a tall man. Eleanor instinctively drew her daughters closer, prepared to defend their small claim to the bench if necessary. But the man who entered moved with quiet purpose rather than aggression, his boots making soft sounds against the wooden floor. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Eleanor looked up to find a man of perhaps 35 years studying her with gentle brown eyes. He was tall and lean, with the kind of face that suggested intelligence tempered by sorrow. His clothes were simple but well made, dark trousers and a wool coat that spoke of modest prosperity. Most notably, he wore a minister's collar. "I'm Reverend Samuel Cross." His voice carried the measured cadence of someone accustomed to offering comfort in difficult times. "I witnessed what happened yesterday at Brennan's store. I wanted to see if you and your daughters were all right." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with renewed shame. "We're fine, Reverend. Thank you for your concern." Samuel's eyes took in their obvious circumstances, the carpetbag serving as a pillow, the wrinkled clothes, the faint shadows of hunger beneath. Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. "Forgive me, but you don't appear fine. When did you last have a proper meal?" The gentle question nearly broke Eleanor's composure. She'd grown accustomed to harsh words and judgment, but kindness was harder to bear. "We ate on the train yesterday morning." "Then you must be famished." Samuel glanced at the twins, who were watching him with the cautious curiosity of children who had learned to be wary of adult intentions. "There's a cafe down the street that serves excellent breakfast." Would you allow me to provide you with a meal? Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. She'd already endured enough charity-tinged pity for one lifetime. But Rose's small hand pressed against her stomach, and Lily's hollow cheeks reminded her that her pride was a luxury her daughters couldn't afford. "That's very kind of you, Reverend." The cafe was warm and fragrant with the smell of coffee and bacon. Samuel chose a corner table away from other early customers, seeming to understand Eleanor's need for privacy. The twins fell upon their plates of eggs and toast with barely restrained hunger, while Eleanor forced herself to eat slowly, despite her body's desperate craving for nourishment. "You're very generous," she said quietly, "but I should warn you, we have no means to repay your kindness." Samuel studied her over his coffee cup. "I'm not seeking repayment, Mrs. Hartwell. Sometimes we're called to help one another simply because it's right." There was something in his tone that made Eleanor look more closely at his face. Behind the minister's composed exterior, she recognized the shadows she'd seen in her own mirror, the weight of loss that never fully lifted, only settled into the bones until it became part of you. "You're a widower," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Samuel's hand tightened slightly on his cup. "Yes. My wife Martha died 2 years ago, along with our son during childbirth." The words came out carefully controlled, as if he'd learned to speak of his loss without letting it overwhelm him. "I understand something of being alone with nowhere to turn." Eleanor felt an unexpected kinship with this quiet man, who had shown her family kindness when the rest of the town had offered only judgment. "I'm sorry for your loss." "And I for yours." Samuel's eyes moved to the twins, who were listening. With the intense focus children brought to adult conversations they only partially understood. "These are your daughters?" "Rose and Lily. They're 8. Eleanor's voice warmed, as it always did when speaking of her children. "Rose is the optimist. She believes everything will work out if we just try hard enough. Lily is more cautious. She's had to be." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" "Brennan made it clear he won't honor your agreement." The blunt question forced Eleanor to confront the reality she'd been avoiding. "I'll find work. There must be something. Sewing, cleaning, cooking. I'm not afraid of hard labor." "Cedar Falls isn't Chicago, Mrs. Hartwell. Work for women is scarce, especially for a woman with children and no local connections." Samuel's tone remained gentle, but his words carried an uncomfortable truth. "Winter's coming early this year. You'll need more than occasional employment." Eleanor set down her fork, her appetite fading as the enormity of their situation pressed down on her. "Are you suggesting we should leave?" "I'm suggesting you might consider an alternative arrangement." Something in Samuel's voice made Eleanor look up sharply. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part calculation, part compassion, and something deeper that made her pulse quicken with wariness. "What kind of arrangement?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Eleanor and her daughters. When he spoke, his words came slowly, as if he were working through the idea even as he voiced it. "Cedar Falls needs a minister's wife. I need someone to manage my household and help with parish duties. You need security and a home for your daughters." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "We could enter into a marriage of convenience, purely practical, you understand. You would have a respectable position in the community, and I would have assistance with my responsibilities." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. Are you proposing marriage?" "A business arrangement," Samuel corrected, gently. "Nothing more. Separate quarters, separate lives for the most part, but it would give you the protection of my name and position, and your daughters would have stability and education." The proposal was so unexpected that Eleanor felt dizzy. After Thomas Brennan's cruel rejection, she had never imagined another man might offer her marriage, even one framed in such practical terms. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Samuel's smile was sad and knowing. "I know enough. I know you traveled 1,000 miles to give your daughters a better life. I know you maintained your dignity yesterday when a lesser person might have crumbled. I know you're willing to work for what you need rather than simply accepting charity." He paused. "And I know what it's like to be alone." Eleanor looked at her daughters, who were watching the exchange with wide eyes. Rose looked hopeful, as if she sensed the possibility of the security they'd been seeking. Lily remained cautious, but Eleanor could see her daughter's sharp mind working through the implications. "What would you expect from me?" Eleanor asked. "Carefully. Household management, assistance with church socials and visiting the sick, perhaps help with correspondence. I understand you're educated." Samuel's tone remained businesslike. "In return, you and your daughters would have a home, meals, clothing, and the respectability that comes with being a minister's wife. And you would expect nothing. Personal?" Samuel's cheeks colored slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not looking for a wife in the romantic sense, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm looking for a partner to help me serve this community. If that arrangement appeals to you, we could be married as soon as the legal requirements are met." Eleanor's mind raced. It was practical, respectable, and would solve their immediate crisis. Yet something about Samuel's careful distance troubled her. She sensed pain in him that went deeper than simple grief, a man who had closed himself, off from emotional risk. "The girls," she said finally, "they would be your responsibility as well." "They would be part of our household," Samuel agreed. "I would see to their education and welfare." Eleanor looked at Rose and Lily again. Rose was practically vibrating with hope, while Lily continued her careful observation of the man who might become their stepfather. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Samuel signaled for the check. "But don't think too long, Mrs. Hartwell. Thomas Brennan is already spreading word about yesterday's scene. The longer you remain without protection, the more difficult your situation becomes." As they left the cafe, Eleanor's mind churned with possibilities and fears. Samuel's offer was generous, more generous than she had any right to expect from a stranger. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was as desperate as she was, just in a different way. Back at the train station, Samuel took his leave with a promise to return that afternoon for her answer. Eleanor watched him walk away, noting the careful set of his shoulders and the solitary nature of his stride. Here was a man who had learned to carry his burdens alone. "Mama," Rose said quietly, "I like him. He has kind eyes." Lily nodded slowly. "He didn't look at us like we were trouble." Eleanor pulled her daughters close, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Samuel Cross's offer represented safety, respectability, and a chance for her daughters to have the stable childhood she'd always dreamed of giving them. The question was whether she had the courage to accept help from a man whose own wounds ran as deep as her own. The morning sun climbed higher over Cedar Falls, and Eleanor Hartwell prepared to make the second most important decision of her life. The afternoon sun slanted low through the train station windows when Samuel returned, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty waiting room. Eleanor had spent the intervening hours watching her daughters play quietly with a worn rag doll, their subdued behavior a stark reminder of how precarious their situation had become. She'd made her decision hours ago, but speaking it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. Reverend Cross. She rose from the bench, smoothing her wrinkled skirts with hands that trembled slightly. "I've considered your proposal." Samuel's expression remained carefully neutral, but she caught a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or relief, in his brown eyes. "And I accept. The words came out steadier than she felt. If you're certain this arrangement will serve us both. I am. Samuel's shoulders seemed to relax marginally. We can be married tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. Dr. Mitchell has agreed to serve as witness along with Mrs. Henderson from the bank. Eleanor nodded, though the speed of it all made her feel slightly dizzy. Tomorrow, then. There's one more thing. Samuel's voice carried a careful formality. I've spoken with Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house. She's prepared a room for you and the girls tonight, so you needn't spend another evening here, I thought. That is, it seemed more appropriate. The consideration behind the gesture touched Eleanor unexpectedly. Even in this most practical of arrangements, Samuel was thinking of her comfort and reputation. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. Rose tugged at Eleanor's skirt. Mama, does this mean we'll really have a house with real beds? Eleanor looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Yes, darling, real beds and a kitchen and a place for your doll. Lily stepped closer, her dark eyes fixed on Samuel with that unsettling directness children sometimes possessed. Will you be our papa now? Samuel crouched down to her eye level, his expression gentle but honest. I'll be your stepfather, Lily. That means I'll take care of you and your sister and your mama. Would that be all right with you? Lily considered, this with the gravity of a judge. Will you be mean to Mama? No, Samuel said quietly. I promise you that. Something in his tone must have satisfied her, because Lily nodded once and stepped back to Eleanor's side. Rose, emboldened by her sister's acceptance, bounced forward. Can I call you Papa Samuel? Samuel's throat worked visibly. If you'd like to, Rose. Eleanor felt an unexpected stab of emotion at the exchange. Whatever Samuel's motivations for this arrangement, his kindness toward her daughters appeared genuine. Perhaps that would be enough. The next afternoon, Eleanor stood before the small mirror in her boarding-house room, attempting to make herself presentable for her second wedding. Her best dress, the same one she'd worn to meet Thomas Brennan, would have to suffice. She'd managed to wash and press it, and Mrs. Peterson had kindly lent her a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers. You look beautiful, Mama, Rose said softly from where she sat on the narrow bed, wearing her only good dress with the carefully mended tear at the hem. Thank you, sweetheart. Eleanor's reflection showed a woman who had aged beyond her 28 years, but there was something different in her eyes today. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of cautious hope she hadn't felt in months. Lily appeared beside her sister, unusually quiet even for her reserved nature. Are you scared, Mama? Eleanor turned from the mirror to face her daughters directly. A little, she admitted, but sometimes we have to be brave even when we're frightened. Reverend Cross is a good man, and he's offering us a chance at a better life. Will we really get to stay this time? Lily's question carried the weight of a child who had learned not to trust promises of permanence. Eleanor knelt and took both girls' hands in hers. I believe we will, but remember, this is different from what most married people have. Reverend Cross and I are helping each other, but we're not. We don't love each other the way I loved your papa. Rose tilted her head thoughtfully. But maybe you could learn to. The innocent question caught Eleanor off guard. Maybe, sweetheart, but that's not why we're doing this. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Peterson's voice called through the thin wood. Mrs. Hartwell, the Reverend is here. Eleanor's stomach clenched with sudden nerves. We'll be right there. Samuel waited in the boarding-house parlor, dressed in his best black suit with a simple white flower in his lapel. He looked as nervous as Eleanor felt, though he managed a smile when he saw them. You look lovely, he said quietly, and Eleanor felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the genuine compliment. Thank you. She smoothed her skirts one more time. Shall we? The walk to the church took only a few minutes, but Eleanor felt as if she were moving through thick water. Townspeople paused in their activities to watch the small procession, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. She caught a sight of Thomas Brennan standing outside his store, his face dark with what might have been anger or embarrassment. She lifted her chin and looked straight ahead. Cedar Falls Community Church was a modest wooden structure with simple stained glass windows that cast colored light across the worn pews. Dr. Mitchell waited near the altar, a tall, kindly-looking man with silver hair and understanding eyes. Beside him stood Martha Henderson, the bank president's wife, her expression carefully neutral as she watched Eleanor approach. "Dr. Mitchell," Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet sanctuary. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for witnessing this ceremony." Dr. Mitchell smiled warmly. "It's my pleasure, Samuel. Mrs. Hartwell." He nodded to Eleanor with gentle courtesy that helped settle her nerves slightly. Martha Henderson's greeting was more reserved. "Mrs. Hartwell." Her sharp eyes took in Eleanor's appearance with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to judging others, but her tone remained polite. The ceremony itself was brief and practical, much like the arrangement it formalized. Samuel spoke his vows in a clear, measured voice, promising to honor and protect Eleanor and provide for her and her daughters. Eleanor's own words came out steadier than she'd expected, though her hands shook slightly as Samuel placed a simple gold band on her finger. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Dr. Mitchell said gently. "Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Eleanor's breath caught. They hadn't discussed this part, and for a moment both she and Samuel stood frozen. Then Samuel stepped closer, his hands coming up to gently frame her face. His kiss was soft and brief, more formal than passionate, but Eleanor felt something flutter in her chest, nonetheless. Rose clapped enthusiastically, while Lily watched with solemn approval. Dr. Mitchell signed the marriage certificate with a flourish, followed by Martha Henderson's more restrained signature. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cross," Dr. Mitchell said warmly. "I hope you'll be very happy in Cedar Falls." Mrs. Cross. Eleanor tested the name silently and found it sat more comfortably than she'd expected. "Thank you, Doctor." She managed a genuine smile. "I hope so too." The parsonage sat adjacent to the church, a tidy two-story house with white clapboard siding and a small front garden. Samuel opened the door with obvious nervousness, stepping back to let Eleanor and the twins enter first. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it's comfortable enough." Eleanor stepped into the front hallway and felt something inside her chest ease. The house was clean and simply furnished, with the kind of solid, modest comfort she hadn't experienced in years. Afternoon sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating worn but well-maintained furniture and shelves lined with books. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. Samuel led them through the main rooms, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, a modest dining room, and a kitchen that was larger and better equipped than any Eleanor had used since leaving her childhood home. Upstairs, he showed them 3 bedrooms. "This would be yours and the girls," he said, opening the door to the largest bedroom. Inside were a double bed and a smaller trundle bed, along with a washstand and wardrobe. "I thought... that is, I assumed you'd prefer to stay together, at least initially." Eleanor nodded, touched again by his thoughtfulness. "That would be perfect." "My room is across the hall," Samuel continued, his tone carefully neutral. "The 3rd bedroom serves as my study, but if you need the space for anything else..." "I'm sure we'll be fine," Eleanor said quickly. The separate sleeping arrangements clarified the boundaries of their arrangement in a way that was both reassuring and oddly disappointing. Rose and Lily had been exploring the room with growing excitement. The trundle bed was the first real bed either girl had slept in since leaving Chicago, and Rose bounced on it experimentally. "Careful, Rose," Eleanor cautioned, but Samuel chuckled. "It's sturdy enough. Dr. Mitchell's youngest used to visit frequently before." His voice trailed off, and Eleanor caught a flicker of old pain cross his features. "Before your wife died," she finished gently. Samuel nodded. Martha loved having children in the house. She would have. He stopped, shaking his head slightly. "I'm sorry, this isn't the time for such talk." "Don't apologize." Eleanor's voice was soft with understanding. "She was part of your life. Pretending otherwise won't honor her memory or help any of us." Samuel looked at her with something like surprise, as if he hadn't expected such understanding from his practical wife. "Thank you." Lily had been listening to this exchange with her usual intensity. Now she approached Samuel with careful steps. "Did she like children?" she asked quietly. Samuel's expression softened. "Very much. She always said this house was too quiet without young voices in it." "Then maybe she wouldn't mind us being here," Lily said with 8-year-old logic that somehow managed to be profound. Samuel's throat worked visibly. "No," he said quietly. "I think she'd be glad." Their first evening together passed with careful politeness. Eleanor prepared dinner from supplies she found in Samuel's well-stocked pantry, while the twins explored their new surroundings with the barely contained excitement of children who had finally found safety. Samuel proved to be an appreciative dinner companion, complimenting Eleanor's cooking with genuine pleasure. "I haven't had a meal this good since." He paused, then continued more carefully. "In quite some time. I'm glad you enjoyed it." Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly as they settled into conversation. Samuel was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss topics beyond the weather and local gossip that had comprised most of her social interactions in Chicago. After dinner, he helped clear the table without being asked, a consideration Eleanor hadn't expected from a man of his position. Rose chattered happily about their new room, while Lily sat quietly in the corner, still watching Samuel with evaluating eyes. "Rose, Lily," Eleanor said as the evening grew late, "time to get ready for bed." "Can Papa Samuel tell us a story?" Rose asked hopefully. Samuel looked startled by the request. That is, I don't know many stories suitable for children." "Bible stories," Rose suggested. "Mama used to tell us about Daniel and the lions." Something crossed Samuel's face. Pain mixed with something that might have been longing. "I suppose I could try." Eleanor watched from the doorway as Samuel sat on the edge of the trundle bed, his tall frame folded awkwardly as he began to tell the story of Noah's Ark. His voice grew more confident as he spoke, and both girls listened with rapt attention. Rose asked questions about the animals, while Lily simply watched Samuel's face with growing trust. When the story ended and prayers were said, Samuel rose to leave, but Rose caught his hand. "Thank you, Papa Samuel," she said sleepily. "I'm glad Mama married you." Samuel's breath caught audibly. I'm glad too, Rose." Lily, not to be outdone, sat up in bed. "Will you tell us another story tomorrow?" "If you'd like," Samuel said softly. Eleanor felt her throat tighten at the gentle interaction. Whatever this arrangement was or wasn't, Samuel's kindness toward her daughters appeared genuine. That would have to be enough. After the girls were settled, Eleanor and Samuel found themselves alone in the sitting room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with awareness of their changed circumstances. "This feels strange," Eleanor said finally. "Yes," Samuel agreed. but not unpleasant. Eleanor looked at him across the small space that separated their chairs. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, less guarded than she'd seen them before. "We're both doing this for practical reasons." "Yes," Samuel said again, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "But that doesn't mean we can't be kind to each other." "No," Samuel said quietly. "It doesn't." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. When Eleanor finally rose to retire, Samuel stood as well. "Eleanor," he said, her Christian name sounding strange but not unwelcome in his voice. "Thank you for today, for all of this." "Thank you," she replied, "for giving us a home." As Eleanor prepared for bed in her new room, listening to her daughter's peaceful breathing from the trundle bed, she reflected on the day's events. She was Mrs. Samuel Cross now, mistress of a comfortable home and wife to a kind man who asked nothing from her but competent household management. It was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd stepped off the train in Cedar Falls. If it wasn't the romantic love she'd shared with Robert, it was still something valuable. Safety, respect, and the possibility of building something worthwhile. From practical beginnings, outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the promise of winter and change. But inside the parsonage, Eleanor Cross fell asleep to the sound of her daughter's gentle breathing and the knowledge that, for the first time in years, they had a real home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they learned to navigate their unusual family arrangement, but tonight it was enough to know they belonged somewhere at last. Eleanor woke to the sound of church bells echoing across Cedar Falls, their bronze voices calling the faithful to Sunday worship. For a moment, she lay still in the unfamiliar bed, disoriented by the comfortable mattress and clean sheets that smelled of lavender rather than the musty dampness of the boarding house. Then memory flooded back. She was Mrs. Samuel Cross now, and today would mark her first appearance before the congregation as their minister's wife. The thought sent a cold knot of anxiety through her stomach. Rose stirred in the trundle bed, her hair a tangle of brown curls against the white pillowcase. Lily had been awake for some time, Eleanor realized, lying perfectly still with that watchful stillness that had become her younger daughter's trademark since Robert's death. "Good morning, girls," Eleanor said softly, sitting up and reaching for her wrapper. Through the bedroom window, she could see townspeople making their way toward the church, families dressed in their Sunday best walking along the tree-lined street. "Do we have to go to church, Mama?" Rose asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I mean, now that we live here?" "Of course we do." Eleanor moved to the washstand, pouring water from the pitcher into the basin. "Your stepfather is the minister. The congregation will expect to see us there." Lily sat up, her dark eyes serious. "Will they stare at us?" Eleanor paused in her washing, the simple question cutting straight to her own fears. "Perhaps, but we'll hold our heads high and show them we belong here." The words sounded more confident than she felt. An hour later, Eleanor stood before her small wardrobe, surveying her limited options with growing dismay. Her best dress was the same one she'd worn to meet Thomas Brennan, then again for her wedding yesterday. The memory of Thomas's rejection still stung, and she couldn't bear the thought of wearing it before the critical eyes of the congregation. Her only alternative was a navy wool dress that had seen better days, carefully mended at the cuffs and hem. It would have to do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel appeared in the kitchen as Eleanor was braiding Rose's hair. His own appearance, impeccable in his black ministerial coat and white collar. He looked composed and confident, every inch the respected Reverend Cedar Falls had known for 2 years. "Good morning," he said, his tone carefully formal. "I trust you slept well?" "Very well, thank you." Eleanor finished Rose's braid and moved to tackle Lily's more stubborn curls. "The girls are excited to attend their first service here." It was a small lie. Rose looked nervous, and Lily appeared ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. But Samuel smiled encouragingly at both girls. "I think you'll enjoy it. Mrs. Patterson plays the organ beautifully, and the choir has been working on some lovely hymns." "Will people be nice to us?" Rose asked with characteristic directness. Samuel's smile faltered slightly. "Most people will be very welcoming. Cedar Falls is a good community." He paused, meeting Eleanor's eyes over Rose's head. "Though some may need time to adjust to our circumstances." Eleanor understood the warning behind his careful words. Their hasty marriage had provided ample material for gossip, and she had no illusions about how some members of the congregation might view Thomas Brennan's rejected mail-order bride now, installed as their minister's wife. "We're prepared for that," she said quietly. The walk to the church felt like running a gauntlet. Eleanor held Rose's hand while Lily pressed close to her other side, and Samuel walked slightly ahead, greeting parishioners with his usual gentle authority. But Eleanor was acutely aware of the conversations that stopped when they approached, the eyes that followed their progress, the whispered comments that resumed once they'd passed. "Look at her, bold as brass," she heard Mrs. Agnes Crowley's sharp voice from behind them. "Not even a week since Brennan threw her over, and now she's landed herself a preacher." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. Samuel's jaw tightened, and she could see him fighting the urge to turn around and address the comment directly. "Morning, Reverend," called out Jim Patterson, the store clerk. His greeting was warm enough, but his eyes skated over Eleanor and the twins with obvious discomfort. "Fine weather we're having." "Indeed it is, Jim. I'd like you to meet my wife Eleanor and her daughters Rose and Lily." Eleanor managed to smile and nod, though Jim's return greeting was stilted. Behind him, his wife whispered something to Martha Henderson, who stood with perfect posture beside the church steps, her expression unreadable. The church interior buzzed with pre-service conversation that noticeably quieted as Samuel led his new family down the center aisle. Eleanor felt the weight of dozens of stairs as they made their way to the front pew, traditionally reserved for the minister's family. She kept her eyes forward and her chin lifted, though her heart hammered against her ribs. As they settled into their seats, Eleanor became aware of the murmured conversations resuming behind them. The words weren't quite distinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Speculation, judgment, and in some cases, barely concealed disapproval. Rose shifted restlessly beside her, picking up on the tension even if she didn't understand its source. Lily sat perfectly still, but Eleanor could feel her daughter's wariness radiating outward like heat from a stove. Samuel took his place at the pulpit, and the congregation gradually settled into attentive silence. His sermon was about forgiveness and Christian charity, themes that Eleanor suspected were chosen with deliberate care. His voice carried the same gentle authority she'd heard in their private conversations, and she found herself genuinely moved by his words about offering grace to those who struggled and extending welcome to strangers. But even Samuel's eloquent plea for compassion couldn't entirely dispel the chill Eleanor felt from certain corners of the congregation. The service concluded with a hymn that Eleanor remembered from her childhood, and she joined her voice to the others, finding some comfort in the familiar melody. As the final notes faded, Samuel offered the benediction, his eyes briefly meeting Eleanor's across the sanctuary. "Go in peace, and may God's love sustain you through all trials." The words felt like a personal message, and Eleanor drew strength from them as the congregation began to file out. The after-service socializing in the churchyard proved even more challenging than Eleanor had anticipated. Some parishioners approached with genuine warmth. Dr. Mitchell introduced her to his elderly mother with obvious pride, and the schoolteacher, Miss Fleming, spoke kindly to Rose and Lily about starting classes the following week, but others maintained a careful distance, their greetings polite but cool. Eleanor noticed Agnes Crowley holding court near the church steps, her voice carrying just loud enough to ensure her comments would be overheard. "I'm sure she's a perfectly nice woman," Agnes was saying to a cluster of other ladies. "But you have to wonder about the circumstances. A respectable widow doesn't usually find herself rejected by one man and married to another within days." "Agnes," Martha Henderson's voice cut through the group with surprising sharpness. "Perhaps we should focus on welcoming new members to our community rather than speculating about their private affairs." Eleanor looked up in surprise. Martha Henderson's support was unexpected. The banker's wife had been cordial but reserved during the wedding ceremony, and Eleanor had assumed she disapproved of the hasty marriage. Agnes's face flushed at the rebuke. "I'm simply concerned about the children, Martha. They've been through so much upheaval." "Then perhaps we should make an effort to help them feel at home here," Martha replied crisply. She moved away from Agnes's group and approached Eleanor directly. "Mrs. Cross, I hope you and your daughters will join us for the ladies' auxiliary meeting on Thursday. We're planning the harvest social, and I'm sure we could use your help." Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude for the public show of acceptance. "I would be honored, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you. Please call me Martha. We're neighbors now." The small gesture of friendship was like a crack in the wall of community judgment, and Eleanor felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Perhaps not everyone in Cedar Falls had already made up their minds about her worthiness, but Agnes Crowley wasn't finished. She approached with determined steps, her smile sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Cross," she said, placing deliberate emphasis on the title. "How lovely to finally meet you properly. I'm Agnes Crowley. My husband manages the Patterson Ranch." "Mrs. Crowley," Eleanor inclined her head politely, "I hope you don't mind my saying, but you certainly work quickly. From train station to altar in less than a week. That must be some kind of record." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Samuel appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Crowley," his voice carried a note of warning, "I trust you're not suggesting there was anything improper about our marriage." Agnes's smile never wavered. "Of course not, Reverend. I'm simply impressed by your efficiency, though I do hope Mrs. Cross understands the responsibilities that come with being a minister's wife. The community has certain expectations. I'm sure Eleanor will exceed all reasonable expectations," Samuel replied firmly, "as she has already begun to do." The subtle rebuke in his tone wasn't lost on Agnes, whose smile finally faltered. "Of course. Well, I should find my husband. Good day." As Agnes retreated, Martha Henderson stepped closer. "Don't let her rattle you," she said quietly. "Agnes means well enough, but she has a talent for making mountains out of molehills. The rest of us are perfectly capable of judging your character for ourselves." Eleanor felt a rush of warmth toward this unexpected ally. "Thank you, Martha. That means more than you know." "Nonsense. Cedar Falls needs good people, and from what I've observed, you and your daughters are exactly that." Martha's eyes moved to Rose and Lily, who were standing nearby with careful attention to the adult conversation. "Speaking of which, girls, how do you feel about starting school tomorrow?" Rose brightened immediately. "I love school. I can already read really well, and I know my numbers up to 100. "Wonderful. And you, Lily?" Lily pressed closer to Eleanor's side. "Will the other children be nice to us?" Martha's expression softened with understanding. "Some will be, dear, and the ones who aren't, well, they'll learn better in time. Miss Fleming is an excellent teacher. and she won't tolerate unkindness in her classroom. That evening, as Eleanor helped the girls prepare for bed, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. The community's reception had been mixed, as she'd expected, but Martha Henderson's support had been a welcome surprise, and Samuel's quiet defense of her in the churchyard hadn't gone unnoticed. "Mama," Rose said as Eleanor tucked her into the trundle bed, "some of those ladies didn't seem very nice. Not everyone will welcome us immediately, sweetheart. Sometimes people need time to get used to changes." Lily looked up from her pillow. "Mrs. Henderson was nice, and Papa Samuel didn't let that mean lady say bad things about you." Eleanor's throat tightened at Lily's observation. Her daughter was right. Samuel had stepped in when Agnes Crowley's comments had grown too pointed, offering the protection of his position and reputation without making a scene. "No, he didn't," Eleanor agreed. "He's a good man." After the girls were asleep, Eleanor found Samuel in his study, working on next week's sermon by lamplight. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what you did today with Mrs. Crowley." Samuel set down his pen. "Agnes has a talent for stirring up trouble. I won't have her making you uncomfortable in your own church." "Your church," Eleanor corrected gently. "Our church," Samuel said with quiet firmness. "You're part of this community now, Eleanor. That means something." Eleanor felt something warm and unexpected flutter in her chest at his words. She'd entered this marriage expecting nothing more than practical protection, but Samuel's quiet support offered something she hadn't dared hope for: genuine partnership. "The girls were worried about school tomorrow," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Fleming is fair and kind, but children can be cruel when they sense difference. Rose and Lily will face some challenges." "They're stronger than they look," Eleanor said with a mix of pride and worry. "They've had to be." "Perhaps, but they shouldn't have to face those challenges alone." Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. "I might speak with Miss Fleming tomorrow, just to ensure she's aware of their circumstances." Eleanor felt another flutter of gratitude for his consideration. That would be helpful. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the lamplight casting gentle shadows around the small study. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pine trees, and Eleanor found herself thinking that this felt almost domestic, like a real marriage built on mutual care and shared concerns. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. She'd entered this arrangement with clear boundaries and practical expectations. But sitting here with Samuel, discussing their daughter's welfare and community challenges, she began to wonder if those boundaries might prove less permanent than she'd assumed. "I should let you return to your work," she said, rising from the chair. "Eleanor." Samuel's voice stopped her at the doorway. "Today went well, all things considered. You handled yourself with dignity and grace." "I had good support," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. "Thank you for that." As Eleanor prepared for bed, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been a desperate widow facing an uncertain future. Tonight, she was the wife of a respected minister, welcomed by some and scrutinized by others, but no longer alone in facing whatever challenges lay ahead. It wasn't the romantic love she'd shared with Robert, but it was something valuable nonetheless: partnership, protection, and the growing possibility that practical arrangements might bloom into something deeper given time and care. Tomorrow would bring new tests as Rose and Lily faced their first day at Cedar Falls School. But tonight, Eleanor Cross fell asleep, feeling more hopeful about their future than she had in months. October settled over Cedar Falls like a gentle benediction, painting the mountainsides in shades of gold and crimson that took Eleanor's breath away each morning. The harsh scrutiny of her first weeks as Samuel's wife had softened into something more manageable, Curious glances rather than open stares, polite nods instead of whispered conversations that stopped when she passed. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching Samuel in the small garden behind the parsonage. He was teaching Rose how to harvest the last of the season's vegetables, his patient voice carrying through the crisp air as he showed her how to tell when carrots were ready to pull. Lily sat nearby on an overturned crate, sketching the scene in a small notebook Samuel had given her the week before. "The secret," Samuel was saying, "is to look at the tops. See how these are nice and full. That means the carrot underneath is ready." Rose nodded solemnly, her small hands working carefully to loosen the soil around the orange crown, poking through the earth. When she finally pulled it free, a perfect straight carrot the length of her palm, she let out a delighted squeal. "Papa Samuel, look how big it is." Eleanor's hands stilled on the dish she'd been washing. Rose had taken to calling Samuel Papa Samuel naturally, without any prompting or awkwardness. But it was the first time Eleanor had heard her daughter drop the qualifier, and something in her chest tightened at the simple word. Samuel's reaction was equally telling. His face softened with an emotion Eleanor had learned to recognize, the careful tenderness of a man who had expected never to hear a child call him father again. "That's a beautiful carrot, Rose," he said quietly. "Your mother will be able to use it for tonight's stew." Through the window, Eleanor watched her daughter beam with pride before carefully placing the carrot in the wicker basket at Samuel's feet. It was such a small moment, this shared accomplishment between stepfather and child, but Eleanor found herself blinking back unexpected tears. In the 6 weeks since their marriage, she'd watched Samuel gradually emerge from the careful shell of grief that had surrounded him. The change was subtle, a readiness to smile, participation in conversations that went beyond ministry duties, the way he'd begun joining them for evening talks by the fireplace instead of retreating immediately to his study. The twins had been the catalyst for much of this transformation. Rose's irrepressible optimism had worn down Samuel's protective distance through sheer persistence, while Lily's quiet intelligence had engaged his scholarly nature in ways Eleanor suspected he hadn't experienced since his wife's death. "Mrs. Cross?" Eleanor turned to find Dr. Mitchell standing in her kitchen doorway, his medical bag in hand and concern creasing his weathered features. "Doctor, please come in." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, immediately worried. "Is someone ill?" Not exactly. James Mitchell had become a regular visitor to the parsonage, his friendship with Samuel extending naturally to include Eleanor and the girls. "I've just come from the Patterson Ranch. Young Tommy took a fall from the barn loft. Nothing serious, just some bruising and a good scare. But his mother is beside herself, and I thought—" He paused, studying Eleanor's face. "Well, I thought you might be willing to sit with her for a while. Agnes Patterson has a way of working herself into a state when one of her children is hurt." Eleanor nodded immediately. "Of course. Let me get my shawl." Actually," Dr. Mitchell's voice carried a note of hesitation. "There's something else. Agnes Crowley is there as well, supposedly helping but mostly offering commentary on how such accidents could be prevented with proper supervision." Eleanor understood the warning. Agnes Crowley had maintained a cool politeness toward Eleanor since their first encounter, but her disapproval remained evident in small ways. The way she changed subjects when Eleanor joined conversations, the pointed looks during church services, the subtle suggestions that Eleanor's daughters were receiving more attention than was entirely appropriate. "I see." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "All the more reason for me to go. Mrs. Patterson needs support, not criticism." Dr. Mitchell smiled with approval. "Samuel chose well when he married you, Eleanor. I'll tell Agnes Patterson to expect you within the hour." After Dr. Mitchell left, Eleanor found Samuel still in the garden with the twins. She explained the situation quickly, and Samuel's response was immediate. "Of course you should go. Take the wagon. It's too far to walk. And the afternoon is turning cold." He paused, studying her expression. "Will you be all right? I know Agnes Crowley can be challenging." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at his concern. "I'll manage. Mrs. Patterson needs someone who understands what it's like to worry about a child's safety." Samuel's eyes met hers with understanding. They'd never spoken directly about the fears that haunted every parent, but Eleanor had noticed his protective watchfulness when Rose climbed too high in the apple tree behind the church, the way he'd quietly spoken to Miss Fleming about preventing the twins from being excluded from playground games. "Mama's going to help take care of Tommy Patterson," Rose announced, having overheard the conversation. "He fell out of the barn like Jack fell down the hill." "That's right, sweetheart." Eleanor smoothed Rose's hair, now tangled from her gardening adventures. "Will you help Papa Samuel finish harvesting the vegetables?" The title came naturally now, Eleanor realized. Somewhere in the past weeks, Samuel had stopped being Reverend Cross or your stepfather, and had simply become part of their family structure. The Patterson Ranch sat in a valley 10 miles outside Cedar Falls, surrounded by rolling hills that glowed amber in the afternoon sun. Eleanor found the household in controlled chaos. Mrs. Patterson hovering over 8-year-old Tommy, who was obviously enjoying the attention despite his bruised ribs, while Agnes Crowley offered a steady stream of advice from her position near the kitchen stove. "Eleanor?" Mrs. Patterson's relief was evident as she rose from her son's bedside. "Dr. Mitchell said you might come. I can't thank you enough." "Of course. How is Tommy feeling?" The boy grinned up at her, his freckled face marred by a spectacular bruise along his left cheek. "I flew just like a bird, Mrs. Cross. For about 3 seconds, anyway." Eleanor bit back a smile. "I'm sure you did. But perhaps next time you could find a safer place to practice flying." "That's exactly what I told him," Agnes Crowley interjected from across the room. "Children these days seem to have no sense of proper caution. When I was young, we knew better than to climb where we didn't belong." Eleanor saw Mrs. Patterson's face tighten with the familiar guilt of a mother second-guessing every decision. She moved to sit beside Tommy's bed, her voice gentle, but carrying enough authority to redirect the conversation. "Tommy, I have 2 daughters about your age. Would you like to hear about the time Rose decided to climb the water tower in Chicago?" Tommy's eyes widened with interest, and even Mrs. Patterson leaned closer. Eleanor launched into a carefully edited version of Rose's adventure, emphasizing both the natural curiosity that led children into mischief and the importance of learning from experience rather than simply avoiding all risk. Agnes Crowley's commentary gradually faded as Eleanor's story captured the room's attention. When she finished, Tommy was laughing and Mrs. Patterson looked considerably more relaxed. "Your daughters sound delightful," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Tommy, perhaps when you're feeling better, we could invite them for a visit." "I'd like that," Eleanor replied, meaning it. Rose especially would enjoy seeing the ranch animals. Agnes Crowley cleared her throat pointedly. "Speaking of your daughters, Eleanor, I hope they're adjusting well to school. It can't be easy for them coming from such different circumstances." There it was, the subtle reminder that Eleanor and her children were outsiders, charity cases who should be grateful for whatever acceptance they received. Eleanor felt her spine stiffen, but before she could respond, Mrs. Patterson spoke up. "Agnes, really. The Cross girls are lovely children. Miss Fleming was just telling me how well they're doing. Rose is already reading at a level far above most children her age, and Lily has a talent for mathematics that quite impressed her." Eleanor felt a surge of pride in her daughters, followed by gratitude toward Mrs. Patterson for her defense. They've always been quick learners. Their father valued education highly. Oh, as does Samuel, Mrs. Patterson continued with enthusiasm. I've never seen him take such interest in children's development. Just last week, he was asking my husband about arranging for the girls to learn riding. He seems quite devoted to them. Devoted, Agnes repeated with a slight edge to her voice. How fortunate for everyone that the arrangement has worked out so conveniently. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication, but Mrs. Patterson's sharp look silenced Agnes before she could continue. Agnes, I think Tommy could use some quiet rest now. Perhaps you should be getting home to your own family. The dismissal was polite but firm, and Agnes had little choice but to gather her things and take her leave. After she was gone, Mrs. Patterson turned to Eleanor with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about Agnes. She means well, but she sometimes speaks without thinking. Eleanor managed a smile. I understand. Change isn't always easy to accept. No, but that doesn't excuse rudeness. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried conviction. You've brought joy back to Samuel's life, Eleanor. Anyone with eyes can see that. Agnes is simply too stubborn to admit when she's wrong. The drive back to Cedar Falls gave Eleanor time to reflect on Mrs. Patterson's words. Joy back to Samuel's life. Was that what she'd done? She'd been so focused on the practical benefits of their arrangement, security for her daughters, household management for him, that she hadn't considered what else might be growing between them. But as she guided the wagon through the familiar streets of town, Eleanor found herself thinking about the small changes she'd observed in Samuel over the past weeks. The way he lingered over dinner conversations instead of retreating immediately. To his study, his patient teaching of the twins, whether it was gardening techniques for Rose or helping Lily with her mathematical puzzles. The evenings when they sat by the fireplace, sharing comfortable silences or discussing books they'd both read. Most tellingly, there were moments when Eleanor caught Samuel looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite define. Not the careful gratitude of their early days, but something warmer and more complex. The parsonage was glowing with lamplight when Eleanor arrived home, and she could hear laughter from the kitchen before she even opened the door. Inside, she found Samuel and the twins engaged in what appeared to be a cooking experiment of questionable success. "Mama," Rose called out, her apron dusted with flour. "We tried to make biscuits for dinner, but they came out all flat and funny-looking." Samuel looked sheepish, a streak of flour across his cheek. "I'm afraid my culinary skills are somewhat limited. I thought it would be a nice surprise for when you returned, but—" Eleanor surveyed the kitchen. Flour on every surface, a bowl of what looked like cement sitting on the counter, and three faces looking at her with guilty expressions. Instead of dismay, she felt laughter bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest. "What you've made," she said solemnly, "are pancakes disguised as biscuits. Fortunately, I know exactly how to remedy this situation." Working together, they salvaged the evening's meal, turning Samuel's failed biscuits into serviceable pancakes and preparing a simple soup from the vegetables the twins had harvested that morning. The girls chatted about their day at school, while Samuel asked thoughtful questions about their lessons, and Eleanor found herself watching the easy interaction with something that felt suspiciously like contentment. After dinner, as had become their habit, they gathered in the sitting room. Samuel helped Lily with her arithmetic, while Rose practiced her reading aloud, and Eleanor worked on mending a tear in one of Samuel's shirts. It was domestic and peaceful in a way Eleanor hadn't experienced since the early days of her marriage. To Robert. "Mama," Lily said suddenly, looking up from her slate, "are we really going to stay here forever?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Are we really Papa Samuel's family now, or are we just visiting for a long time?" Eleanor glanced at Samuel, who had gone very still. She realized that despite their growing comfort with each other, they'd never actually discussed the permanence of their arrangement with the children. "You're my daughters," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "That means this is your home, and you'll stay here as long as you want to, forever, if that's what you choose." Rose looked up from her book with shining eyes. "Really? Even if we're not your real daughters?" Samuel set aside Lily's slate and knelt in front of both girls, his expression serious but warm. "You are my real daughters. Family isn't just about blood, girls. It's about love and choice and commitment. I chose to be your father, and you chose to be my daughters. That makes us as real a family as any." Eleanor felt her throat tighten at the simple declaration. Watching Samuel with her daughters, seeing the genuine affection in his eyes and the security his words brought to their faces, she realized that somewhere along the way, their practical arrangement had transformed into something neither of them had planned. "Now," Samuel continued, rising and returning to his chair, "I believe Rose was reading to us about Alice and the Cheshire Cat." As Rose resumed her reading, her voice confident and clear in the lamplight, Eleanor found herself studying Samuel's profile. The careful guardedness that had marked their early interactions had given way to something softer, more open. When he caught her looking, his smile was warm and unguarded. For the first time since agreeing to their practical marriage, Eleanor allowed herself to wonder what it might be like if their arrangement became something more. The thought both thrilled and terrified her, but as she sat in the circle of lamplight with her daughters and the man who had chosen to be their father, Eleanor Cross began to believe that some risks might be worth taking. Outside, the October wind whispered promises of winter to come, but inside the parsonage, warmth and belonging had taken root in ways none of them had expected. What had begun as necessity was slowly, carefully, blooming into something that looked remarkably like love. The warmth of that October evening lingered in Eleanor's memory for 3 days before the first letter arrived. She was hanging laundry behind the parsonage, enjoying the crisp November air and watching Rose chase falling leaves while Lily sat reading beneath the apple tree, when she heard the postman's wagon rattling down the street. Samuel emerged from his study to collect the mail, as was his custom, but when he returned to the house, his expression was troubled. "Eleanor," he called softly from the kitchen door, "there's a letter for you. From Chicago." The words sent ice through Eleanor's veins. No one in Chicago knew where she'd gone. She'd been careful to leave no forwarding address, telling herself it was because she wanted a fresh start. But the truth was more complicated than that, and now it seemed her past had found her anyway. The envelope bore the letterhead of Hutchins and Associates Legal Services, and Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it. Samuel waited nearby, respectful of her privacy, but clearly concerned by her reaction. "Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, our firm has been retained to collect outstanding debts owed by your late husband, Robert Hartwell, at the time of his death. Our investigation has revealed debts totaling $347, including medical expenses, unpaid rent, and personal loans. As his widow, you are legally responsible for these obligations. We have traced your recent departure from Chicago and require immediate payment or arrangement for settlement. Failure to respond within 30 days will result in legal action to recover the full amount plus accrued interest and legal fees." Eleanor's vision blurred as she read the rest of the formal language. $347 more. Money than she'd ever seen at one time. More than most families in Cedar Falls earned in a year. Money she certainly didn't have and had no way of obtaining. "Eleanor?" Samuel's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "What is it?" She looked up to find him studying her face with growing alarm. The letter fluttered from her nerveless fingers, and Samuel caught it before it could fall to the floor. "May I?" he asked gently. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. She watched his expression change as he read, saw his eyebrows draw together, in concern and something that might have been disappointment. "You didn't know about these debts?" he asked carefully. Eleanor's voice cracked. "I knew there were some medical bills from Robert's final illness. But when I left Chicago, I thought they couldn't follow me. I thought if I just disappeared." The admission hung between them like an accusation. Eleanor had deceived him, if not outright then by omission. She'd let him believe. Her circumstances were straightforward when the truth was far more complicated. "Eleanor." Samuel's voice was gentle but serious. "This is a significant amount of money." "I know." Eleanor sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "I know, and I don't have it. I can't pay it." Samuel studied the letter again, his lips moving silently as he calculated. $347, plus interest and legal fees if it goes to court. That could easily become $500 or more. The numbers felt impossible, astronomical. Eleanor looked through the kitchen window at her daughters, still playing in the autumn sunshine, oblivious to the crisis that threatened to shatter their newfound security. "They'll come here," she said quietly. "These lawyers, they'll come to Cedar Falls looking for me. They'll make it public. Your reputation, your position in the community." She looked up at Samuel with dawning horror. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" Samuel set the letter down carefully on the kitchen table. For a long moment he said nothing, and Eleanor felt her heart breaking as she imagined his regret, his realization that he'd tied himself to a woman whose problems went far deeper than simple widowhood. "You should have told me," he said finally. "I know." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "I was so desperate, and you were offering us safety, and I thought maybe they wouldn't find me. Maybe I could start over without having to explain about Robert's debts and my failures and all the ways I couldn't protect my family." "Your failures?" Samuel's voice sharpened with something like anger. But when Eleanor looked up fearfully, she realized his anger wasn't directed at her. "Eleanor, you were a widow with 2 small children and no resources. Your husband's medical debts aren't your moral failing. But they are my legal responsibility, and now they're yours too." Eleanor's composure finally cracked, and tears began spilling down her cheeks. "I've brought this disaster into your life, into your home. I've made you liable for debts you never agreed to take on." "Actually," Samuel said with surprising calm, "I don't believe that's accurate. These debts predate our marriage, and they're attached to property we don't own. But that's not the point." Eleanor wiped her eyes with her apron, trying to focus on his words through her panic. "What is the point?" "The point is that you felt you couldn't trust me with the truth. That after 6 weeks of marriage, you still felt you had to carry this burden alone." The gentle reproach in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. Eleanor realized that Samuel was hurt not just by her deception, but by her lack of faith in their partnership. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you'd regret marrying me. Afraid you'd realize what a mistake you'd made." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor could hear Rose's laughter drifting through the window, a sound that might soon be lost to them if these debts destroyed Samuel's reputation and position. "There's something I need to tell you as well," Samuel said finally. "I received a letter yesterday that I haven't mentioned." Eleanor looked up, surprised by the confession. "My late wife's sister, Margaret, is coming for a visit. She'll arrive next week and plans to stay for several days." Samuel's voice carried a tension Eleanor hadn't heard before. Margaret never approved of Martha marrying a minister. She felt it was beneath her sister's station, and she's never forgiven me for what she sees as my failure to save Martha and the baby. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "She doesn't know about our marriage." "No, My letters to her have been infrequent. She's coming because she received word from someone in town about my remarriage, and she wants to meet my new wife." Samuel's smile was strained. "Margaret has very strong opinions about propriety and social position. She's going to take one look at our circumstances and conclude that I've dishonored Martha's memory by marrying a mail-order bride out of mere convenience." The weight of their combined secrets settled over the kitchen like a suffocating blanket. Eleanor could see the future unfolding with horrible clarity: Margaret's arrival and inevitable judgment, the debt collectors following their trail to Cedar Falls, the community's shock when Samuel's new wife was revealed as a woman fleeing. "Legal obligations. I should leave," Eleanor said quietly, "before Margaret arrives, before the lawyers come. If I disappear again, you can tell everyone I abandoned you. Your reputation would be damaged, but not destroyed. You could recover from being a minister whose wife ran off, but not from being married to a woman who brought financial scandal to your door." "No." Samuel's voice was sharp and immediate. "Absolutely not. Samuel, be reasonable. If I stay, I'll destroy everything you've built here. Your position, your standing in the community, your ability to serve these people." I said no. Samuel moved closer, his brown eyes blazing with unexpected intensity. "You're not leaving. Eleanor, we're not abandoning this family we've built, but the debts, we'll find a way to handle the debts. People have been dealing with financial obligations since the beginning of time. It's not insurmountable." "And Margaret?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor could see him wrestling with something deeper than simple family politics. "Margaret will have to accept that I've moved on with my life," he said finally. That I've found something worth fighting for." There was something in his tone that made Eleanor's heart skip. "Samuel, I need to tell you something, Eleanor, something I probably should have said weeks ago." Samuel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "This marriage, this arrangement we entered into, it's not what it was supposed to be, not for me." Eleanor felt the world tilt slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere between teaching Rose to garden and listening to Lily's questions about mathematics and watching you turn this house into a home, I stopped thinking of you as a convenient solution to my domestic problems." Samuel's eyes met hers directly. "I've fallen in love with you, Eleanor. With all of you, you and Rose and Lily, you've become my family in every way that matters." Eleanor stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You? What?" "I love you." Samuel's voice grew stronger with the repetition. "I love the way you hum while you're cooking, and the way you worry about the girls' happiness, and the way you've never once complained about the challenges we've faced. I love how you've brought laughter back into this house and given me a reason to look forward to coming home each evening." Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, but these were different tears, warm and overwhelming, and tinged with a hope she hadn't dared acknowledge. "I love the way you read bedtime stories," Samuel continued, "and how you've made friends with half the town despite Agnes Crowley's best efforts. I love watching you with the girls and seeing how much joy you take in their accomplishments. I love Samuel." Eleanor's voice broke on his name. "Stop." He fell silent, and Eleanor could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. She realized he was afraid she was about to reject him, to tell him that their practical arrangement was all she wanted. Instead, she stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, telling myself it wasn't part of our agreement, but I love you too." Samuel's breath caught audibly. "Eleanor, I love how gentle you are with the girls, and how you defend me when people like Agnes Crowley try to make me feel small. I love your Sunday sermons and the way you explain difficult concepts so patiently. I love that you've never once made me feel like charity, even though that's exactly what I was when I arrived here." Samuel's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You were never charity, Eleanor. You were a gift I was too foolish to recognize at first." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other's faces and staring into each other's eyes, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. The careful boundaries they'd maintained, the polite distance that had marked their interactions, dissolved as if they'd never existed. "The debts," Eleanor began. "We'll handle them together," Samuel said firmly. "Whatever it takes. Margaret, we'll have to accept that I've chosen my own path forward." Samuel's voice carried a conviction Eleanor had never heard before. "I won't let anyone, not even family, threaten what we've built here." Eleanor felt her heart swell with something that felt suspiciously like hope. For weeks, she'd been preparing herself for the inevitable moment when their practical arrangement would crumble under the weight of reality. Instead, she'd discovered that Samuel's feelings had been evolving just as hers had. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "When you really think about what you're taking on, the debts, the scandal, the complications, are you sure this is what you want?" Samuel leaned down until his forehead rested against hers. "Eleanor Cross, you and your daughters are the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years. I'm not letting anyone or anything take that away from us." Through the window, Eleanor could see Rose and Lily still playing in the afternoon sun, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. They looked secure and happy in a way they never had in Chicago, and Eleanor realized that Samuel was right. They'd built something worth fighting for. "Then we face whatever comes together," she said softly. "Together," Samuel agreed, and then he kissed her. It was their second kiss, but the first that meant something beyond social ceremony. Eleanor tasted hope and determination, and the promise of a future built on more than mere convenience. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Eleanor felt as if she were seeing Samuel clearly for the first time. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, carrying the promise of the first winter snow. But inside the parsonage, Eleanor and Samuel Cross held each other close and prepared to weather whatever storms lay ahead, knowing they would face them not as strangers bound by practical need, but as partners united by choice and strengthened by love. Margaret Whitmore arrived on the Tuesday morning train like an ill wind, her black traveling dress impeccable despite the long journey, and her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon that seemed designed to communicate disapproval. Eleanor watched from the parsonage window as Samuel walked toward the station to meet his late wife's sister, his shoulders set with the kind of tension she'd learned to recognize as dread. "Is that Papa Samuel's family?" Rose asked, pressing her nose against the glass beside Eleanor. "His sister-in-law," Eleanor corrected gently. "She was married to his first wife's brother." Lily looked up from her arithmetic slate. "Will she, like us?" Eleanor wished she could offer reassurance, but Samuel's warnings about Margaret's character had been clear enough. "We'll do our best to make her feel welcome, and hope she'll give us the same courtesy." But even from a distance, Eleanor could see the rigid set of Margaret's spine as Samuel helped her from the train, the way she held herself apart from him as they walked toward the parsonage. This was not a woman inclined toward charity or understanding. Eleanor smoothed her best dress, the navy wool she'd worn to her first church service, and checked that her hair was properly pinned. She'd spent the morning cleaning the already spotless house and preparing a lunch that would demonstrate her domestic capabilities, though she suspected Margaret would find fault regardless of her efforts. The front door opened with the careful formality Samuel used when he was trying to maintain control of a difficult situation. "Eleanor, girls, I'd like you to meet Margaret Whitmore. Margaret, this is my wife Eleanor and her daughters Rose and Lily." Margaret stepped into the front hall with the careful attention of someone cataloguing evidence. Her pale eyes swept over Eleanor's dress, the modest furnishings, the twins standing politely beside their mother, and Eleanor could see her reaching conclusions with each glance. "Mrs. Whitmore," Eleanor said, stepping forward with her best attempt at warmth. "Welcome to our home. Samuel has told me so much about you." "Has he?" Margaret's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being deferred to. "How interesting. He's told me remarkably little about you." The barb landed exactly as intended, and Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I hope we can remedy that during your visit. Would you like to see your room? You must be tired from your journey." Margaret's smile was sharp as winter wind. How thoughtful. Though I confess I'm surprised Samuel remarried so quickly. Martha has been gone such a short time. 2 years, Samuel said quietly, but with an edge Eleanor recognized. As warning. 2 years, yes, though it seems like yesterday to those of us who truly loved her. Margaret's gaze fixed on Eleanor. "But then I suppose when one is pragmatic about marriage, sentiment becomes less important." Eleanor felt as if she'd been slapped, but before she could respond, Rose stepped forward with her characteristic directness. "Are you sad that Papa Samuel's first wife died?" she asked with the innocent clarity only children could achieve. Margaret looked down at Rose with something that might have been surprise. "Yes, child, I am very sad. Martha was a wonderful woman who deserved better than she received." The implication struck Samuel like a physical blow. Eleanor saw his face pale, saw the guilt and pain Margaret's words had been designed to inflict. "Rose, Lily," Eleanor said, and quickly, "why don't you show Mrs. Whitmore to her room? I'm sure she'd like to rest before lunch." As the twins led Margaret upstairs, chattering about the house's features with determined politeness, Eleanor turned to Samuel. His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the old wounds Margaret had torn open with surgical precision. "She blames me," he said quietly, once they were alone. "For Martha's death, for the baby's death. She always has." Eleanor moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You know that's not rational. Dr. Mitchell told me complications in childbirth are common, unpredictable. Dr. Mitchell wasn't Martha's brother-in-law. He didn't grow up with her, didn't promise her parents he'd look after her." Samuel's voice carried the weight of 2 years' worth of self-recrimination. "Margaret believes I failed in that promise." "And you believe it too," Eleanor said softly, finally understanding the depth of guilt Samuel had been carrying. Samuel's silence was answer enough. Lunch was a minefield of polite conversation and subtle attacks. Margaret praised the meal while managing to imply that Eleanor's cooking was adequate but unremarkable. She asked pointed questions about Eleanor's background, expressing surprise at her limited education and narrow experience beyond Chicago's tenements. "And you have no family to speak of?" Margaret asked, delicately cutting her roast beef. "No. One was concerned when you traveled so far from home." "My parents died when I was young," Eleanor replied evenly. "My husband's family. We lost touch after his death." "How unfortunate. Family connections are so important, don't you think? They provide stability, context, a sense of where one belongs in the world." Margaret's smile was sharp. "Martha, of course, came from one of Boston's finest families. Her father was a judge, her mother active in all the most important charitable organizations." Eleanor felt each word like a carefully placed needle. Margaret was systematically establishing her late sister-in-law's superior breeding while highlighting Eleanor's lack of social connections. "Mama came from Chicago on the train all by herself," Rose announced proudly. "She was very brave." "I'm sure she was, dear, though one wonders what circumstances would require such dramatic action." Margaret's pale eyes fixed on Eleanor with predatory interest. "It must have been quite desperate circumstances indeed." Samuel's fork clattered against his plate. "Margaret, that's enough. I'm simply trying to understand the situation, Samuel. After all, it's not every day a widowed minister remarries so hastily and to someone so different from his first wife." The comparison hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Eleanor forced herself to take another bite of food, though it tasted like ash in her mouth. "Different how?" Lily asked with her characteristic directness. Margaret looked down at the 8-year-old with something that might have been pity. "Well, dear, your mother comes from very different circumstances than Martha did. Martha was educated at the finest schools, spoke French and Italian, played piano beautifully. She was raised to be a minister's wife." "Eleanor is an excellent minister's wife," Samuel said with quiet steel in his voice. "Of course she is, in her own way, though I imagine the congregation has had to adjust their expectations considerably." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. 2 years of building confidence, of finding her place in Cedar Falls, of believing she might actually belong somewhere, all of it crumbled under Margaret's precise demolition. "Excuse me," Eleanor said quietly, rising from the table. "I need to check on the laundry." She escaped to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the wash basin. Through the thin walls, she could hear Margaret's voice continuing its assault, now focused on Samuel's decision-making and judgment. "I simply don't understand how you could have taken on such responsibilities, Samuel. 2 children who aren't your own, a woman with no family or resources. It's not fair to the congregation who depend on your leadership." Eleanor closed her eyes, Margaret's words confirming every fear she'd carried since arriving in Cedar Falls. She was a burden, a complication, a woman who had trapped a good man into supporting her through his misguided sense of duty. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Eleanor dried her hands and went to answer it, expecting perhaps Dr. Mitchell or one of the parishioners. Instead, she found herself face to face with a thin man in a rumpled suit, his eyes cold and calculating as they took in her appearance. "Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell." His voice carried the flat authority of legal proceedings. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Who's asking?" "James Hutchins, representing several creditors in Chicago. I believe you received our correspondence regarding outstanding debts." Behind Eleanor, she heard the dining room conversation stop abruptly. Samuel appeared at her shoulder, his face tense with immediate understanding. "I'm sorry, but you're mistaken," Eleanor said desperately. "My name is Eleanor Cross now. I don't know anyone named Hartwell." Hutchins smiled with predatory satisfaction. "Marriage doesn't eliminate pre-existing debts, Mrs. Hartwell, or should I say, Mrs. Cross. You owe $347 plus accumulated interest and legal fees. I'm here to arrange payment or begin seizure proceedings." Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Behind her, she could hear Margaret's sharp intake of breath, the scrape of chairs as Rose and Lily moved closer to the kitchen door. "This is a private matter," Samuel said firmly, stepping forward. "You have no right to conduct business on my doorstep." "Actually, Reverend Cross, I do. Your wife incurred these debts, and now they're your legal responsibility as well. The community has a right to know what kind of financial obligations their minister has taken on." Eleanor saw her worst fears materializing with horrible clarity. Samuel's reputation, his position, his ability to serve his congregation, all of it threatened by her deception and desperation. "How much?" Samuel asked quietly. $412, with interest and fees," Hutchins replied with satisfaction. "Payable immediately or I'll be forced to file proceedings with the territorial court." $412, more than most families saw in 2 years. Eleanor felt Margaret's presence behind them like a cold shadow. could imagine the satisfaction in her pale eyes as her worst assumptions about Eleanor proved correct. "We'll need time to arrange payment," Samuel said. "I can give you 48 hours. After that, this becomes a matter of public record." Hutchins tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Good day, Mrs. Hartwell, Reverend." As the debt collector walked away, Eleanor turned to face the ruin of everything she'd hoped to build. Margaret stood in the hallway, her expression a mixture of vindication and disgust. "Well," Margaret said with cold satisfaction, "I suppose this explains the hasty marriage. How convenient that you found a minister willing to take on your financial burdens along with your children." "Margaret, stop!" Samuel's voice carried warning. "Stop what? Speaking the truth. This woman has made you liable for hundreds of dollars. In debt, Samuel. She's put your position at risk, your reputation, your ability to serve this congregation. And for what? A marriage of convenience that benefits no one but her?" Eleanor felt something break inside her chest, the last of her hope crumbling under the weight of Margaret's accurate accusations. "You're right," she said quietly. "Eleanor, no—" Samuel started. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Whitmore. I've brought nothing but trouble to Samuel's life. I've put his position at risk, damaged his reputation, and trapped him in obligations he never agreed to take on." Eleanor looked at her daughters, standing wide-eyed in the kitchen doorway, then at Samuel, whose face was pale with understanding of what she was about to say. "I'll pack our things tonight. The girls and I will be gone by morning. You can tell the congregation I abandoned you. It's better than the truth." "You're not going anywhere," Samuel said with quiet steel. "Samuel, be reasonable. The debt collector will make this public. The whole town will know within days. Your congregation will lose faith in your judgment, your leadership." "I don't care." Samuel's voice cut through her protests with surprising force. "I don't care what the town thinks, or what the congregation whispers, or what damage this might do to my reputation." Margaret made a sound of disbelief. "Samuel, surely—" "You want to know the truth, Margaret? Both of you." Samuel's voice grew stronger, more certain. "The truth is that Eleanor and her daughters are the best thing that's happened to me since Martha died. They've brought joy back into this house, purpose back into my life, love back into my heart." Eleanor stared at him, certain she was hearing things. "The truth is that I love Eleanor," Samuel continued, his gaze fixed on her face. "Not out of duty or convenience or misguided charity, but because she's brave and kind and fiercely protective of the people she loves. Because she's made me remember what it feels like to have a family, to look forward to coming home at the end of each day." "Samuel," Eleanor whispered, "the truth is that Rose and Lily are my daughters in every way. That matters. They've called me Papa, and I've never been more honored by any title." Samuel's voice carried absolute conviction. "And if the congregation can't accept that, if they can't understand that love and commitment matter more than social conventions or financial complications, then perhaps I'm not the right minister for them after all." Margaret looked as if she'd been struck. "You would risk everything, your calling, your position, your future, for this woman and her questionable circumstances." Samuel's smile was sad but certain. "Margaret, I lost everything that mattered to me when Martha and the baby died. I thought I'd never find that kind of happiness again. Eleanor and her daughters have given me a second chance at family, at love, at the kind of joy I thought was gone forever. I won't let anyone, not debt collectors, not gossips, not even family, take that away from us." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but these were different tears than she'd shed earlier. These carried hope instead of despair, love instead of fear. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "When you really consider what this means—" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Samuel said firmly. "We'll face whatever comes together, as a family." Through the kitchen window, Eleanor could see storm clouds gathering over the mountains, dark and threatening. But inside the parsonage, surrounded by the people she'd learned to love and the man who had chosen to stand by her despite everything, Eleanor Cross began to believe that some storms could be weathered, some battles could be won, and some love was strong enough to overcome even the worst circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as word of the debt collector's visit spread through Cedar Falls. But tonight, Eleanor held on to Samuel's promise and prepared to discover whether their love was strong enough to survive the trials ahead. The silence that followed Samuel's declaration stretched like a held breath. Margaret Whitmore stood frozen in the hallway, her pale eyes moving between Samuel and Eleanor as if she were witnessing something incomprehensible. Through the kitchen doorway, Eleanor could see Rose and Lily pressed together, their young faces reflecting confusion and worry. "Samuel," Margaret said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "you cannot be serious. This woman has deceived you about her circumstances, brought debt collectors to your door, and now you're prepared to sacrifice your calling for my family," Samuel finished firmly. "Yes, Margaret, I am." Eleanor felt something crack, open in her chest. Not the breaking she'd feared, but the opposite, like ice giving way to spring warmth. The tight knot of shame and fear she'd carried began to loosen. "But the congregation," Margaret began, "will hear the truth from me." "Tomorrow morning," Samuel interrupted, "all of it. Eleanor's circumstances, the debts, our marriage, and my feelings about both. Let them judge us with full knowledge rather than whispered speculation." A sharp rap at the front door interrupted them. Eleanor's heart lurched, wondering if Hutchins had returned with more demands. But Samuel opened the door to reveal Dr. Mitchell, his weathered face creased with concern. "Samuel, Eleanor." His greeting was warm but urgent. "I've just heard the most disturbing rumors. Something about debt collectors and—" He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed Margaret's rigid presence and the tension radiating from the small group. "James, come in," Samuel said wearily. "The rumors are unfortunately accurate." Dr. Mitchell stepped inside, his medical bag in hand and his kind eyes taking in the scene. "I see. And this must be Mrs. Whitmore. I've heard so much about you from Samuel." Margaret inclined her head with cool politeness. "Dr. Mitchell, though I confess I'm surprised Samuel speaks of me at all, given how rarely he corresponds." "Grief affects us all differently," Dr. Mitchell replied gently, then turned his attention to Samuel. "Now, what's this about debt collectors?" "Dilm." As Samuel briefly explained the situation, Eleanor watched Dr. Mitchell's expression. She'd grown fond of the older man over the past months, appreciating his friendship with Samuel and his kindness toward her daughters. But she braced herself, for the disappointment she was certain would follow his understanding of their circumstances. Instead, Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. $412. That's a substantial sum, but not insurmountable. Eleanor stared at him. "Dr. Mitchell, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly, my dear. You're facing debts incurred through no fault of your own, threatening the security you've built for your family." His smile was gentle but determined. "What I don't understand is why you think you have to face this alone." "Because it's not their responsibility," Eleanor said desperately. "The people of Cedar Falls don't owe me anything." "Perhaps not," Dr. Mitchell agreed. "But they owe Samuel a great deal. He's been a faithful minister, a comfort in times of loss, a source of wisdom and guidance. More importantly, he's been a friend to many of us." Margaret made a sound of disbelief. "You can't seriously be suggesting that the community might rally around their minister in his time of need? That friends might help friends?" Dr. Mitchell's tone remained pleasant, but Eleanor caught the steel beneath it. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not sure you understand how highly Samuel is regarded here." or how much joy his marriage to Eleanor has brought. To those who care about him. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Dr. Mitchell, that's very kind, but nothing. The doctor's voice carried the same authority Eleanor had heard him use with difficult patients. Samuel, I'll expect you to announce the full situation at tomorrow's service. No shame, no apology, simply the facts. The congregation deserves to understand what's happening, and they deserve the chance to respond as they see fit. Samuel nodded slowly. You think they'll be supportive? I think, Dr. Mitchell said with a smile, that you might be surprised by how many people have been waiting for an opportunity to show their appreciation for what you've brought to this community. Both of you. Word of the debt collector's visit spread through Cedar Falls with the efficiency of wildfire. By evening, Eleanor had received visits from 3 different neighbors, each offering variations of support that left her feeling overwhelmed and grateful in equal measure. Mrs. Patterson arrived first, bringing a casserole and fierce indignation about debt collectors harassing respectable families. She pressed a small envelope into Eleanor's hands, with instructions not to open it until later, then spent 20 minutes expressing her opinion of people who pursued widows for their dead husbands' medical bills. Miss Fleming, the schoolteacher, came next, with books for Rose and Lily and quiet reassurance that the girls' education would continue, regardless of any financial difficulties. Her matter-of-fact kindness brought Eleanor to tears. Most surprisingly, Martha Henderson appeared at the kitchen door, just as Eleanor was cleaning up after dinner, her usually composed expression showing signs of genuine emotion. Eleanor, I've heard about your troubles, Martha said without preamble. I want you to know that Charles and I stand behind you and Samuel completely. Eleanor invited her in, still somewhat stunned by the banker's wife's support. Martha had been cordial but distant since Eleanor's arrival in Cedar Falls, and her public defense during Eleanor's early weeks had been appreciated but somewhat surprising. Martha, that's very kind, but nothing. Martha's voice carried an edge Eleanor had rarely heard. I want to tell you something, Eleanor, something I probably should have told you months ago. Martha settled into one of the kitchen chairs, her usual perfect posture slightly relaxed. Charles and I lost 4 babies in the first 10 years of our marriage. 4 children who lived just long enough for us to love them before they were taken away. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Martha, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. We don't speak of it. It's not something people discuss in polite society. Martha's smile was sad but steady. But watching you with Rose and Lily, seeing how fiercely you protect them, how you sacrificed everything to give them a better life, it reminds me of the mother I wanted to be. Eleanor sank into the chair across from Martha, overwhelmed by this unexpected revelation. When you first arrived, I'll admit I was skeptical, Martha continued. A mail-order bride with children, marrying our minister so hastily, it seemed improper, potentially scandalous. But then I watched you. I saw how you handled Agnes Crowley's nastiness with dignity. I saw how Samuel began to smile again, how he started looking forward to coming home instead of burying himself in his study. Martha's voice grew stronger, more determined. I saw how Rose and Lily blossomed under Samuel's attention, how they brought joy back into his life. I realized that what you'd created wasn't a scandal, it was a miracle, a family built on choice and commitment and love. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Martha! So when some debt collector from Chicago comes here threatening the family that brought our minister back to life, threatening the security of 2 little girls who've already endured more upheaval than any child should, well, Martha's smile turned fierce. He's going to discover that Cedar Falls takes care of its own. Eleanor looked at this woman she'd thought she understood, seeing depths of pain and strength she'd never suspected. What are you saying? I'm saying that Charles and I will make sure those debts are paid, quietly, without fanfare, because that's what friends do for each other. Martha reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. I'm saying that you belong here, Eleanor. You and your daughters belong in this community, in this family, and we're not letting anyone take that away from you. Eleanor couldn't speak through her tears, but Martha seemed to understand. Now, Martha said briskly, returning to her usual efficient manner, I understand Samuel plans to address the congregation tomorrow morning. Good. It's time everyone understood exactly what kind of woman their minister married, and why they should be grateful he had the good sense to do it. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, with the promise of winter sharp in the air. Eleanor dressed with extra care, choosing her best dress and pinning her hair with particular attention. Whatever happened in church today would determine not just her family's future in Cedar Falls, but their future period. Samuel was quiet as they walked to church, but Eleanor could feel his determination like a living thing. Rose and Lily flanked them, unusually subdued, but dressed in their Sunday best, their hands warm in Eleanor's as they approached the building that had become both sanctuary and trial ground. The church was fuller than usual, Eleanor noticed. Word of yesterday's drama had clearly spread, and curiosity, if nothing else, had brought out members who typically attended only on major holidays. Eleanor caught sight of Thomas Brennan, sitting alone near the back, his expression carefully neutral, and Agnes Crowley with her husband in their usual prominent pew. Margaret sat in the front row, her back straight and her expression unreadable. She'd said little since Dr. Mitchell's visit the evening before, but Eleanor could sense her watching, evaluating, preparing to judge the community's response to Samuel's revelations. Samuel took his place at the pulpit, and the congregation settled into expectant silence. Eleanor felt every eye in the sanctuary focused on her family, and she fought the urge to gather her daughters and flee. "My friends," Samuel began, his voice carrying clearly through the small church, "I have something important to share with you this morning. Not a sermon in the traditional sense, but a testimony about truth, love, and the meaning of community." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as Samuel began to speak. He told them everything, about Eleanor's desperate circumstances when she arrived in Cedar Falls, about their practical marriage arrangement, about the debts that had followed, her from Chicago, and the threat they posed to his position. "Some of you may wonder why I chose to marry a woman I barely knew, why I took on responsibilities that weren't originally mine," Samuel continued, his gaze moving across the congregation. "The simple answer is that I recognized in Eleanor and her daughters the kind of courage and determination that builds strong families and stronger communities." Eleanor watched faces throughout the sanctuary, trying to gauge reactions. Some looked shocked, others thoughtful. A few, like Agnes Crowley, appeared quietly satisfied to have their suspicions confirmed. "But there's a deeper truth I want to share with you," Samuel said, his voice growing stronger. "What began as a practical arrangement has become something far more precious. Eleanor has brought joy back into my life, helped me remember what it means to be part of a family. Rose and Lily have given me the gift of fatherhood when I thought that blessing was lost forever." Samuel paused, his eyes finding Eleanor's in the front pew. "I love my wife. I love my daughters, and I love the life we've built together. If that means sacrificing my position here to protect them from debt collectors and gossips, so be it." The church fell silent as Samuel's words settled over the congregation. Eleanor held her breath, waiting for the murmurs of disapproval, the shifting that would signal rejection. Instead, Martha Henderson rose from her pew. "Reverend Cross," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "Charles and I have something to say." Eleanor's heart sank, certain that even Martha's support wouldn't extend to public defense of their circumstances. "We've watched you serve this community faithfully for 2 years," Martha continued. We've seen how Eleanor has brought happiness back into your life, how those children have given you purpose beyond your pastoral duties." Martha turned to face the congregation, her voice growing stronger. "More importantly, we've seen how Eleanor has enriched our community. She's visited the sick, helped organize church socials, brought warmth and kindness to everyone she's met. She's exactly the kind of woman we should be proud to call our minister's wife." Dr. Mitchell stood. "Next, I agree with Martha. Samuel and Eleanor have built something beautiful together, a family based on love and commitment rather than mere convention. If debt collectors think they can come here and threaten that, they'll discover they're mistaken." One by one, other members of the congregation began to stand. Mrs. Patterson, with tears in her eyes, Miss Fleming nodding firmly. Even Jim Patterson, who'd been awkward around Eleanor since her arrival, rose with quiet dignity. Eleanor felt her throat tighten as more and more people stood, their silent support washing over her like a benediction. These people, her neighbors, her community, were choosing to stand with her family despite the scandal, despite the financial complications, despite everything. Thomas Brennan remained seated, his expression dark with what might have been anger or embarrassment. Agnes Crowley sat frozen, clearly shocked by the community's unified response. But they were in the minority now, their disapproval overwhelmed by the sea of support surrounding Eleanor's family. "Then it's settled," Dr. Mitchell said with satisfaction. "Those debts will be paid, and this family will remain exactly where they belong, here, with us, as valued members of our community." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized what was happening. These people weren't just tolerating her presence or supporting Samuel out of loyalty. They were actively choosing her family, claiming them as part of Cedar Falls in a way she'd never dared hope. Samuel's voice was thick with emotion as he offered the benediction. "Go in peace, knowing that love and community can overcome any obstacle when we stand together." As the congregation began to file out, Eleanor found herself surrounded by neighbors offering hugs, handshakes, and quiet words of support. The envelope Mrs. Patterson had given her the evening before contained $20, more than the woman could easily afford. Similar envelopes appeared throughout the morning, each representing sacrifice and love from people who had chosen to make her troubles their own. Margaret approached as the crowd began to thin, her expression complex and unreadable. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Both of you." Eleanor looked at her in surprise. "I came here expecting to find Samuel diminished by his choice to remarry hastily," Margaret continued. "Instead, I find him more vital and happy than he's been since Martha's death. I see two little girls who clearly adore their stepfather, and a woman who's created the kind of home Martha would have wanted for him." Margaret's smile was small but genuine. "Perhaps I was wrong about the nature of appropriate marriages. Perhaps love can indeed grow from practical beginnings into something quite beautiful." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Margaret. That means more than you know." "Samuel," Margaret said, turning to her brother-in-law, "Martha would be happy for you. She'd want you to have this joy, this family. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." As the day wore on, and the financial contributions were tallied, Eleanor realized that the community had not only raised enough to pay her debts, but had created a surplus that would provide security for months to come. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their family had instead revealed the depth of support they'd unknowingly built. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace, Samuel reading to the girls, while Eleanor mended one of his shirts, Eleanor reflected on the day's events. She was no longer the desperate widow who'd stepped off the train in Cedar Falls months ago. She was Eleanor Cross, beloved wife and mother, valued member of a community that had chosen to claim her as their own. "Are you happy, Mama?" Rose asked sleepily from her place on Samuel's lap. Eleanor looked around at her family. Samuel, with his gentle smile, Lily curled against his side, rose safe and content in his arms, and felt her heart swell with more joy than she'd thought possible. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm very happy." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing Cedar Falls in pristine white. But inside the parsonage, surrounded by love and acceptance and the promise of tomorrow, Eleanor Cross had finally found her place in the world. The days following Samuel's public declaration settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment that Eleanor had never experienced before. The debt crisis had passed, leaving not just financial security, but something more precious: the certain knowledge that they belonged in Cedar Falls, that their community had chosen to embrace them despite their unconventional circumstances. Margaret had extended her visit by a week, but her presence had transformed from judgment to genuine interest in understanding the family Samuel had built. Eleanor found her helping with dinner preparation, listening with surprising attention, as Rose chatted about her school lessons, and even offering gentle guidance to Lily about proper penmanship. "I misjudged you," Margaret admitted one afternoon, as she and Eleanor worked together in the kitchen, preparing preserves from the last of the autumn apples. "I came here expecting to find Samuel trapped in an arrangement that diminished him. Instead, I see a man who's found his way back to joy." Eleanor looked up from the apples she was peeling, touched by the genuine warmth in Margaret's voice. "He saved us, you know. When we arrived here with nothing, no prospects, nowhere to go, Samuel offered us not just shelter, but dignity. And you gave him something in return." Margaret's smile was soft as she stirred the bubbling pot. "You gave him a reason to live. Fully again, instead of simply existing." Martha would have been grateful for that. The easy mention of Samuel's first wife no longer carried the sharp edge of comparison it once had. Over the past week, Margaret had shared stories of Martha's kindness, her love for children, her hope that Samuel would find happiness even if something happened to her. The picture that emerged was of a woman who would have welcomed Eleanor and her daughters, not resented them. "I hope so," Eleanor said quietly. "I never wanted to replace her memory." "You haven't replaced anything," Margaret replied firmly. "You've helped Samuel build something new while honoring what came before. That's the mark of a wise woman." There so, through the kitchen window, Eleanor could see Samuel in the garden with Rose and Lily, teaching them to prepare the beds for winter. The sight filled her with a warmth that went deeper than mere contentment. Somewhere in the months since their practical wedding, watching Samuel with her daughters had become one of her greatest pleasures. "He's a natural father," Margaret observed, following Eleanor's gaze. "Martha always said he would be, even when they lost the baby. She was right about that, as she was about most things." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "The girls adore him. He's given them the stability they've never had, the sense of security I was never able to provide on my own." "And what has he given you?" Margaret asked gently. The question caught Eleanor off guard. She'd grown so accustomed to thinking about Samuel's impact on Rose and Lily that she rarely considered her own transformation. "Partnership," she said. "Finally. Respect. The feeling that my thoughts and opinions matter to someone. I haven't felt valued for myself, not just for what I could provide, since Robert died." Margaret smiled knowingly. "That's not all he's given you." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. She and Samuel had maintained the careful boundaries of their original arrangement, separate bedrooms and polite distance, even as their emotional connection had deepened. But Margaret's knowing look suggested she'd noticed the tension that had begun to build between them, the longing glances and careful touches that spoke of feelings neither had fully acknowledged. "We married for practical reasons," Eleanor said quietly. "You married for practical reasons," Margaret corrected. "But you're staying married for entirely different ones, aren't you?" Before Eleanor could answer, the kitchen door opened and Samuel entered with the twins, all three of them rosy-cheeked from the cold air and laughing about something that had happened in the garden. "The girls want to know if they can make snow angels when it snows again," Samuel said, unwinding his scarf. "I told them they'd have to ask their mother." "Can we, Mama?" Rose asked eagerly. "Papa Samuel says the snow here is different from Chicago snow, cleaner and softer." Eleanor caught the easy way Rose said, "Papa Samuel." How naturally the title came now. Lily, typically more reserved, had begun calling him simply Papa in quiet moments, the ultimate sign of her acceptance and trust. "When the snow comes, we'll all make snow angels," Eleanor promised, and was rewarded by her daughter's delighted squeals. "Even you, Mama?" Lily asked. "Even me?" Samuel's eyes met Eleanor's over the twins' heads, and she saw something there that made her pulse quicken, warmth and affection, and something deeper that she was finally ready to acknowledge. Margaret departed on a Thursday morning, her farewells warm and genuine, in a way that would have been impossible to imagine just weeks before. She pressed small gifts into Rose and Lily's hands, ribbons for their hair and books from Martha's childhood collection, and embraced Eleanor with surprising emotion. "Take care of him," she whispered. "He's found something precious with you and the girls. Don't let him retreat into that shell of grief again." "I won't," Eleanor promised, meaning it. Samuel drove Margaret to the train station, while Eleanor and the twins waved goodbye from the front porch. As the wagon disappeared down the street, Eleanor realized that Margaret's departure marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The external pressures that had defined their early marriage were gone. The community had accepted them, the debts were paid, even Samuel's family had given their blessing. What remained was the question of what they wanted their marriage to become, now that it no longer needed to be merely practical. That evening, after the twins were settled in bed with their usual story and prayers, Eleanor found herself alone with Samuel for the first time in weeks. They sat in their customary chairs by the fireplace, but the comfortable domesticity felt different somehow, charged with possibilities neither had dared explore before. Samuel was reading or pretending to read, while Eleanor worked on a piece of embroidery for the church altar cloth. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken thoughts. "Eleanor," Samuel said finally, setting aside his book. "We need to talk." Eleanor's hands stilled on her needlework. "About what?" "About us, about what this marriage has become and what we want it to be going forward." Eleanor's heart began beating faster. "Samuel, I know we agreed this would be a practical arrangement," Samuel continued, his voice carefully controlled. "Separate lives, mutual assistance, nothing more personal than household management and child-rearing." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, "but that's not what we have anymore, is it?" Eleanor looked up to find Samuel watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. "No," she admitted. "It's not." Samuel rose from his chair and moved to the window, his back to her as he spoke. "I told you weeks ago that I'd fallen in love with you, that this family had become everything to me. But I haven't asked what you want, Eleanor. What you need from this marriage now that survival isn't the primary concern." Eleanor set aside her embroidery, her hands trembling slightly. "What I want. Do you want this to remain a marriage of convenience? Separate rooms, separate lives, polite partnership for the sake of the children and community expectations?" Samuel's voice was quiet but urgent. "Or do you want something more?" Eleanor rose from her chair, drawn by something in his tone. "Samuel, look at me." He turned, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes that matched her own feelings. This strong, gentle man who had saved her family was asking her to save him in return, not from external threats, but from the loneliness that had defined his life since Martha's death. "I want more," she said simply. "I want a real marriage, Samuel. Not just practical partnership, but emotional intimacy, physical closeness, shared dreams for our future." Samuel's breath caught audibly. "Eleanor." "I love you," she continued, the words coming easier now. "I love how patient you are with the girls, how you defend us when others criticize. I love your sermons and your laugh and the way you hum while you're reading. I love that you chose us, that you keep choosing us every day." Oh, Samuel crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with gentle reverence. "Are you certain? Once we cross this line, there's no going back to careful boundaries and polite distance." Eleanor reached up to cover his hands with hers. "I don't want to go back. I want to go forward together as a real family in every sense." Samuel's kiss was different from the chaste peck they'd shared at their wedding ceremony. This was urgent and tender and full of months of suppressed longing. Eleanor felt herself melting against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Eleanor could see wonder in Samuel's eyes. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he whispered against her forehead. "After Martha died, I thought that part of my life was over forever." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "I felt the same way after Robert. But this isn't the same as what we had before. It's something new, something we're building together." Samuel pulled back to look at her directly. "What do you want, Eleanor? For us, for our future together?" Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but she met his gaze steadily. "I want to share your bed. I want to be your wife in truth as well as name. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to give you more children, if God wills it. I want Rose and Lily to have brothers and sisters who carry your name from birth." Samuel's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "You would want that? After everything you've been through, you'd be willing to risk pregnancy, childbirth?" "With you? Yes." Eleanor's voice was steady with certainty. "I trust you, Samuel. I trust us. I want to build a family that's ours together, not just mine that you've accepted." Samuel kissed her again, deeper this time, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. The careful restraint they'd maintained for months dissolved, replaced by the freedom to love each other fully. "Tonight?" Samuel asked against her lips. "Tonight," Eleanor confirmed. Later, lying in Samuel's arms in what was now their shared bed, Eleanor felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Not even in her first marriage, which had been born of young love, but shadowed by poverty and uncertainty. This was different. Mature love, built on mutual respect, shared trials and conscious choice. "No regrets?" Samuel asked softly, his fingers threading through her hair. "None," Eleanor said firmly. "You?" "Only that we waited so long to acknowledge what was between us." Samuel's arm tightened around her. "I've loved you for months, Eleanor. I just didn't think I had the right to ask for more than you'd already given." Eleanor propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "You never have to ask for my love, Samuel. It's yours freely, completely." Samuel's smile was radiant in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. "Mrs. Cross, you continue to amaze me." "Just Eleanor," she said softly. "When we're alone like this, just Eleanor." "Eleanor," Samuel repeated, making her name sound like a prayer. "My Eleanor." The possessive tenderness in his voice sent warmth flooding through her. She was his, completely and willingly, just as he was hers. "The girls will be so happy," Eleanor murmured, thinking of Rose and Lily's reaction when they realized their parents were truly married now, in every sense. "They'll want siblings," Samuel said with a chuckle. "Rose especially has been dropping hints about babies for weeks." "Now," Eleanor laughed, "she's not subtle, our Rose." "Our Rose," Samuel agreed, and Eleanor heard the satisfaction in his voice. These were their children now, fully and completely, bound not by blood, but by love and choice and daily commitment. They talked quietly until nearly dawn, sharing dreams they'd been afraid to voice, making plans that went far beyond mere survival. Samuel spoke of expanding the church, perhaps starting a school. Eleanor shared her hope of organizing charitable work for women in difficult circumstances, using her own experience to help others. As the sun began to rise over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor realized that she was no longer the desperate widow who'd stepped off the train in Cedar Falls months ago. She was Eleanor Cross, beloved wife and mother, integral part of a community that had chosen to claim her, partner to a man who saw her as precious rather than convenient. "I love you, Samuel Cross," she whispered, as sleep finally began to claim them both. "And I love you, Eleanor Cross," he replied, his voice warm with contentment, "now and always." Outside their window, Cedar Falls was waking to a new day, and inside the parsonage, two people who had found love in the most practical of arrangements settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful and lasting from the most unlikely beginnings. The careful boundaries of their original marriage were gone forever, replaced by the infinite possibilities of a love that had grown from choice into something that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the parsonage kitchen, one hand pressed to the gentle swell of her belly while the other stirred the morning porridge. Through the window, she could see Samuel in the garden with Rose and Lily, all three of them tending the vegetable seedlings they'd planted together as spring had given way to early summer. The sight filled her with the deep contentment that had become her constant companion since that night in November, when she and Samuel had finally acknowledged their love. "Mama, are you feeling sick again?" Rose's voice came from the kitchen, or doorway, where she stood with dirt-smudged hands and worried eyes. Eleanor smiled, setting aside her spoon to smooth her daughter's hair. "Just a little queasy, sweetheart. Dr. Mitchell says it's perfectly normal. But the baby's all right." Lily appeared beside her sister, her dark eyes carrying the familiar anxiety that still surfaced when circumstances seemed uncertain. "The baby is perfectly fine," Eleanor assured them both, "strong and healthy, just like you two were." The announcement of Eleanor's pregnancy 3 months ago had been met with pure joy from Rose and Lily, who had immediately begun planning how they would help care for their new sibling. Samuel's reaction had been even more profound, a mixture of wonder, protectiveness, and barely contained happiness that had reminded Eleanor daily of how much this child meant to him. The community's response had been equally warm. Dr. Mitchell had proclaimed himself delighted to deliver Samuel's child. Martha Henderson had begun organizing a collection of baby clothes and necessities, and even Agnes Crowley had softened enough to offer congratulations along with unsolicited advice about prenatal care. "Is Papa coming in for breakfast?" Rose asked, peering through the window at Samuel, who was showing Lily how to properly stake the tomato plants. "In a few minutes. Why don't you help me set the table?" As the girls busied themselves with plates and silverware, Eleanor reflected on how naturally they'd all settled into their roles as a complete family. The careful boundaries and polite formalities of their early marriage had given way to the easy intimacy of people who truly belonged. together. Samuel was no longer Papa Samuel to the twins. He was simply Papa, the man who read them bedtime stories, helped with arithmetic, and had promised to teach them to ride horses when they were older. The kitchen door opened, bringing the scent of earth and growing things, along with Samuel himself, his face brightened by the smile that seemed permanently etched there these days. "Good morning, my beautiful wife," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to Eleanor's temple before his hand settled protectively over her growing belly. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Eleanor said honestly. The morning sickness that had plagued her early months was finally easing, replaced by the glowing energy Dr. Mitchell had promised would come with the second trimester. "And how is our little one?" Samuel's voice carried the wonder that still crept in whenever he spoke of the baby. "Active," Eleanor laughed, covering his hand with hers. "I think we're going to have another energetic child on our hands." "Like, Rose," Lily observed with 8-year-old certainty. "Hey!" Rose protested, but she was grinning. "I'm not that energetic." Samuel chuckled, ruffling both girls' hair. "You're perfect exactly as you are, both of you." The easy affection between Samuel and her daughters never failed to touch Eleanor's heart. They'd bonded completely now, with none of the careful testing that had marked their early relationship. Samuel had become as natural a father to them as if he'd been there since birth, while they'd given him the joy of parenthood he'd thought lost forever. The preparations for their first wedding anniversary celebration had been taken largely out of Eleanor's hands by the women of Cedar Falls, who seemed to view the occasion as a community triumph worth commemorating. Martha Henderson had organized a potluck dinner to be held in the church social hall, while other ladies had volunteered to provide music, decorations, and what appeared to be enough food to feed half of Montana. "They're making such a fuss," Eleanor said to Samuel as they dressed for the evening's festivities. "It's just 1 year." Samuel paused in adjusting his tie, meeting her eyes in their bedroom mirror. "It's not just 1 year, Eleanor. It's the celebration of something the whole community helped build. They feel invested in our happiness, and they should, considering how they rallied around us when things looked darkest." Eleanor smoothed her best dress, a new one Martha Henderson had insisted on commissioning from the traveling seamstress, over her expanding figure. The soft blue fabric accommodated her pregnancy beautifully, while making her feel more elegant than she had in years. "Besides," Samuel continued, moving behind her to fasten a pearl necklace around her throat, a gift he'd surprised her with that morning, "I want everyone to see how beautiful my wife looks carrying our child." Eleanor felt warmth flood her cheeks at the possessive pride in his voice. "Samuel Cross, you're incorrigible. Only when it comes to you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck that made her shiver with pleasure. "Mama, Papa, are you ready yet?" Rose's voice carried up the stairs with barely contained excitement. The twins had been looking forward to the anniversary celebration for weeks, partly because they'd been promised they could stay up late for the dancing. "Coming, sweetheart," Eleanor called back, taking one last look in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the desperate widow who'd arrived in Cedar Falls a year ago. This Eleanor stood straight and confident, her face glowing with health and happiness, her eyes bright with the security of knowing she was deeply loved. "Ready?" Samuel asked, offering his arm. "Ready?" Eleanor confirmed, and together they went downstairs to join their daughters and their community in celebrating the love that had grown from the most practical of beginnings. The church social hall had been transformed with wildflowers and candles, creating an atmosphere of warm celebration that took Eleanor's breath away. It seemed like the entire town had turned out for the occasion, faces both familiar and friendly filling the decorated space. Dr. Mitchell raised his glass as Samuel and Eleanor entered, his voice carrying over the crowd. "To Samuel and Eleanor, Cross, proof that the best marriages are built on friendship, respect, and the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing day. The toast was echoed throughout the hall, and Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the warmth of the reception. These people had become her family in every sense that mattered, supporting her through crisis and celebrating her joy as if it were their own. "Speech! Speech!" someone called from the back of the room, and Eleanor felt Samuel's hand tighten on hers. "I'm not sure what to say," Samuel began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "except that a year ago I thought my chance at family and happiness had passed forever. Then Eleanor and Rose and Lily walked into my life and showed me that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances." He paused, his eyes finding Eleanor's. "They taught me that family isn't just about blood or convention, it's about choice, commitment, and the daily decision to put each other first. Eleanor, you've given me more joy than I thought possible, and I promise to spend the rest of our lives trying to deserve the gift of your love." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks as applause filled the hall. Samuel's words weren't just pretty sentiments, they were the truth of what they'd built together, the foundation of the life they continued to create each day. The evening passed in a blur of good food, laughter, and music. Eleanor danced carefully with Samuel, her growing belly pressed between them as they swayed to the fiddle music provided by Jim Patterson and his brothers. Rose and Lily spun around the dance floor with various partners, their faces bright with joy and belonging. As the evening wound down, Eleanor found herself approached by an unexpected figure, Thomas Brennan, looking uncomfortable but determined, as he made his way through the crowd. "Mrs. Cross," he said formally, stopping in front of her with obvious difficulty. "Might I have a word?" Eleanor glanced around for Samuel, who was across the room helping to stack chairs, then nodded cautiously. "Of course, Mr. Brennan." Thomas cleared his throat, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I wanted to. That is, I've been thinking about what happened when you first arrived in Cedar Falls." Eleanor waited patiently, recognizing the struggle of a proud man trying to find words for something difficult. "I was wrong," Thomas said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "Wrong to reject you and your daughters so publicly, wrong to make your circumstances more difficult than they already were. I let my own preferences cloud my judgment about what was decent and right." Eleanor studied his face, seeing genuine regret beneath the awkwardness. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Brennan. It takes courage to admit a mistake." "I don't expect forgiveness," Thomas continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I recognize how badly I behaved and how fortunate Reverend Cross was to find you when I was too blind to see your worth." Eleanor felt a surprising wash of compassion for this man who had once seemed like her greatest enemy. "You weren't ready for children, Thomas. That's not a moral failing. It's self-knowledge. Better to be honest about your limitations than to make promises you couldn't keep." Thomas's relief was visible. "You're very kind, Mrs. Cross. Kinder than I deserve." "We all deserve second chances," Eleanor said gently. "That's what this community taught me." As Thomas walked away, Eleanor reflected on how much her perspective had changed. A year ago, his rejection had felt like a devastating judgment on her worth. Now she could see it for what it truly was, not a reflection of her inadequacies, but a mismatch that had led her to exactly where she needed to be. "What did Thomas want?" Samuel asked, appearing at her elbow with concern in his voice. "To apologize," Eleanor said simply, "and to congratulate us on our happiness." Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? People change, Samuel. Sometimes they grow into better versions of themselves." Eleanor smiled up at her husband. "Look at us. A year ago we were strangers making a practical arrangement. Tonight we're celebrating the love we've built together." Samuel's arm tightened around her waist, the best practical arrangement I ever made. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the twins were tucked into bed with stories of the evening's festivities, Eleanor and Samuel sat together on their front porch, watching the stars appear over the Montana mountains. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Cross," Samuel said softly, his hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Cross," Eleanor replied, leaning into his warmth. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of Cedar Falls, a town that had become truly home in every sense that mattered. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Thomas had accepted us that first day?" Eleanor asked. Samuel considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I think about what we have now. Not just the love between us, but the family we've created, the community that's embraced us, the child we're expecting. And I can't regret the path that led us here." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to you, something beyond your control. But this year taught me that it's something you build, choice by choice, day by day." "With the right partner," Samuel added, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "With the right partner," Eleanor agreed. As they sat together under the vast Montana sky, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She was no longer the desperate widow who had stepped off the train with nothing but hope and her daughter's hands in hers. She was Eleanor Cross, beloved wife, devoted mother, valued member of a community that had chosen to claim her as their own. The child in her womb stirred, and Eleanor placed her hand over Samuel's where it rested on her belly. This baby would be born into security and love, surrounded by siblings who adored them and a community that would watch them grow. They would never know the uncertainty and fear that had marked Rose and Lily's early years, never doubt their place in the world or their family's commitment to their happiness. "I love you," Eleanor whispered into the starlit darkness. "And I love you," Samuel replied, his voice warm with contentment. "All of you, Rose, Lily, and this little one we're waiting to meet." Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself sink into the profound peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, but tonight, surrounded by love and security and the promise of tomorrow, Eleanor Cross was complete. The mountains stood sentinel around Cedar Falls, and in the parsonage, where a family had been built from necessity and nurtured into love, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that they had created something beautiful and lasting from the most practical of beginnings. Their love story would become legend in Cedar Falls, the tale of the mail-order bride who found true love with the grieving preacher, the family that chose each other and proved that the strongest bonds are forged not by blood, but by commitment, compassion, and the daily decision to put each other first. And in years to come, when other desperate souls found their way to Cedar Falls seeking second chances, they would find a community that understood the power of redemption and the courage it takes to build something new from the pieces of what came before. They would find Eleanor and Samuel Cross, living proof that love can bloom in the most unexpected places and that family is ultimately about choice rather than circumstance. The stars wheeled overhead, and in the quiet peace of a Montana night, the Cross family slept, secure in their love and confident in their future, having found in each other everything they had been searching for and more than they had ever dared to dream. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.